Chapter 709. Alan's warning. As Klein looked at the bar, which was so silent that he could hear breathing, he was taken aback. Only then did he step in and walk straight to the bar counter as though nothing had happened. "I should change my appearance the next time I come," he thought in frustration, just short of face-palming. Ukva's lack of awareness that Gehrman Sparrow had successfully hunted Slaughter-Curtius had made Klein believe that the latest news hadn't reached the city of generosity, and he boldly came to the seaweed bar. To his surprise, the problem lay in Ukva, who had kept a distance from the adventurer circles. He was a little behind on the news, and the crazy adventurer's infamy had already spread amongst the pirates around the Rørsted archipelago. Sighing silently, Klein sat in front of the bar counter and rapped the wooden counter. "1 glass of Southville beer. 6 pence. The bartender gulped his saliva with great difficulty. Klein took out a few copper pence and placed it in front of him. Without a change in expression, he asked, "Any developments recently?" The bartender took the money and carefully delivered the beer to Gehrman Sparrow. Then he forced a smile and said, "Admiral Emerius Revolt has been transferred back to Backland. Admiral Robert Davis has replaced him, becoming the highest-ranking naval commander of the surrounding waters for the kingdom. The archipelago's situation is a little tense, and many pirate crews have sent people to gather intelligence. Admiral Emerius was ultimately implicated by his brother and lost his post. However, as long as he wasn't directly involved, it can't get worse for him when considering his status as a demigod. At the very least, he can maintain the treatment he receives as an admiral. Nothing will happen to his family either. Once the matter blows over, he might still have a chance of being a high-ranking member of the Navy." Klein gulped down the beer and asked in passing, "Which family is Robert Davis from?" "No, he's not a noble. He's one of the rare officers who slowly rose up the ranks to admiral. In the Berserk Sea, Sonia Island, and East Balam, he has rendered plenty of meritorious services." The bartender recalled the commendations the papers recently had for Admiral Robert Davis. After a pause, he said, "However, I heard that he has received the sponsorship of many nobles." "Yes, with the Imperial Navy, admirals who are from the royal family or aristocrats, or have close ties with them, take up at least 80%. The remaining 20% are mainly rear admirals and vice admirals." Klein had long learned of the situation from the documents he received from Emerius Revolt. Compared to this, the army was a lot better. Gehrman Sparrow didn't continue asking as he seemed to focus on his drinking. The bartender then added, "In the past 2 to 3 months, the resistance has been very active. They've been constantly attempting to destroy railways or set up blockades on public roads. They've given the Governor General's office quite a headache, forcing it to dispatch large numbers of soldiers to maintain a smooth flow of traffic. However, the resistance army seldom clashes with them head-on. I'm aware of that. It's all going according to my plans. In a place where the natives and mixed bloods take up 80%, it's not difficult for the resistance to gather accurate intelligence. Coupled with external sponsors, it wouldn't be hard for them to live on for short periods of time. The reason why they were in a dire situation in the past was all because Calvetua was an irrational sea serpent. It often got them to attack key nodes in a city, fighting head-on with the Lone Kingdom's navy and army." Klein mumbled to himself in delight as he drank another mouthful of beer. He had also warned the resistance to not be overly active. If they forced the Governor General's office into a corner, the Lone Kingdom might send Sequence 5 Beyonders or even demigods who were good at pursuit and tracking. With the Resistance's strength, there was no way they could put up a fight. In the name of Sea God, Klein's instructions were to maintain while slightly improving their present situation and await for the global situation to change. This wasn't too far off. According to the various matters Miss Justice had feedback on, and with the Hanged Man giving insight that affirmed this, it was certain that once the Lone Kingdom was done with its internal reforms and making the original and newly added ironclad warship become its main force in combat, a war against the southern continent's colonies was inevitable. He silently drank his beer until the bartender was done. He then wore his hat, got up, and left the bar, heading straight for his inn. Along the way, he saw bronze-skinned children with curly hair and natives with brown jackets and pantaloons. These people either made way in horror without even looking up, or they were hunched in a corner, looking at Klein with a complicated look in their eyes. Klein helplessly curved the ends of his lips as he silently returned to his room. He didn't immediately change his appearance and head to the various bars to seek out pirates. This was because he was certain that they would hide the entire night and not appear again. Just as Klein was planning to enter Grozel's travels to explore it, there was a knock on his door. Without needing to ask, all he did was grip the knob when the visitor's appearance naturally surfaced in his mind. It was a middle-aged man dressed in a dark red coat and white slacks. He wore a ship-shaped hat. The corners of his eyes and mouth, as well as his forehead, had clear wrinkles. He was none other than the captain of the White Agate, military personnel, just Eland. Impressive. News of me appearing in Byam just spread, and he managed to find where I'm staying. Of course, it's because I didn't attempt to hide myself. I directly used my identification documents to check in. Klein turned the knob and pulled open the door. He politely greeted him, "Good evening." "Good evening. I'm very glad to see you back in Byam." Eland took off his hat and entered the room without any reservations. "Is there something?" Klein pulled a chair over and sat down. Eland sat opposite him and chuckled. "Isn't visiting a friend the most important matter? You're such a smooth talker. Too bad Anderson is gone, or he can learn from you." Klein felt triggered for some reason. He maintained his usual state and looked into Eland's eyes. "All right, you've made your visit." Eland seemed to have expected such a response. He smiled and said, "Do you still remember Donna? Of course, she and her brother are adorable. I wonder if they've recovered from the fright I gave them the last time and have given up any curiosity towards the mysterious world." Klein calmly replied, "I don't have amnesia. Forgetting unimportant matters aids our mental health." "Heh, this isn't said by Emperor Roselle." Eland simply explained, "Didn't you tell Donna's father that he should post an advertisement in the Sonia Morning Post for 3 days in a row, asking to buy Demir's special cured meat if he needs your help? He did so recently, but unfortunately, you weren't in Byam or the nearby seas." "What happened after that?" Klein's instincts told him that Donna and her family weren't in serious trouble based on Eland's relaxed attitude. Eland chuckled and said, "I heard your conversation back then, and after discovering the advertisement, I visited them using the address. As you know, Donna is a lovely lady. She reminds me of my daughter. The matter isn't too complicated. Erdy, who's Donna's father, had a bunch of valuable goods plundered by the crazy captain. This plunged him into a terrible economic situation. Although it isn't as bad as going bankrupt, life for him has definitely turned for the worse. That's why he wishes to commission you to get the goods back. I knew you weren't in Byam back then, so I had to go through my own channels to help Erdy recoup the goods at a reasonable price." Crazy Captain? Klein first found the title familiar before recalling where he had heard it before. According to red-haired Helene, Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy's delivery of slaves for the Demonist sect was passed off to Crazy Captain Connors Victor. The latter appeared to have close connections with many of the slave dealers and merchants in the Lone Kingdom. And this was tied to the truth behind the human disappearances in the colonies, as well as the underlying reason of the Great Smog of Backlund. I've always been trying to investigate this matter. Back when I attacked Tracy, that was half the reason, but unfortunately I didn't succeed. Later, I was busy acting for the digesting of the potion and my search for mermaids, so I temporarily abandoned my investigations." Klein's thoughts raced as he asked without a perturbed look, "Where's Crazy Captain now?" "Erdy has already gotten back his goods," Eland hissed, emphasizing that the matter had been settled. Klein looked at him and repeated, "Where's Connors Victor now?" Eland shook his head in exasperation. "I've no idea, but his subordinates are still in Byam trying to gather intelligence. As you know, Admiral Emirius has returned to Backlund, and he's been replaced by Admiral Davis. Many changes are in place, so the pirates need to have a new handle of the latest situation. Therefore, I guess that Connors's ship is docked in the shadows of one of the nearby islands, but that's a guess with no way to confirm." After listening in silence with his hands clasped, Klein said, "Thank you." Eland exhaled and looked out the window as his expression rapidly turned solemn. "I came here today to tell you that you're too eye-catching. The higher-ups are beginning to pay attention to you. A powerhouse that can easily kill Curtius wouldn't be ignored. It's best you stop using this identity for checking in, otherwise, you might face some difficult problems. Klein nodded seriously and said, "All right." He was very grateful for Captain Eland's warning, but he didn't show it on his face. After Eland left, Klein immediately changed his appearance, switched ins, and confirmed that he wasn't tracked by the military. After doing all of that, he began considering the search for crazy Captain Connors Victor. To others, this was an extremely difficult task, but Klein had a trick up his sleeve. It was to use the Sea God Scepter and communicate with nearby sea creatures. As long as Connors Victor was in the Rorstad Archipelago's waters, there was no way he could hide from Klein. Of course, it was necessary that he had enough time to perform the search. Chapter 7:10. Plan above the gray fog. Klein extended his hand and summoned the Sea God Scepter from the junk pile. He began browsing through the countless points of light swirling about the sealed artifact. Every point of light corresponded to a believer's prayer. The glows swirled with ethereal holiness. Soon, Klein did a preliminary screening as he focused on the waters instead of the archipelago. After he had isolated the Sea God Scepter above the gray fog, he was unable to directly use the divine artifact to sense the surrounding waters and do anything effective. He had to rely on the scenes of his believers' prayers as a foundation before reaching out 5 nautical miles to influence the corresponding undersea creatures. Klein emanated his spirituality and touched one of the specks of light. He saw a native performing his daily prayers in the evening on a fishing boat before docking. As Klein's thoughts changed, the angle of the scene quickly drew higher as more dark clouds and undulating waves appeared in the scene. There are signs of a storm brewing hours ahead? That's right. I did find the atmosphere repressing when I was out. That's why Eland said that crazy Captain Connors' ship is likely to be hiding in the shadows of some island. It was to avoid the storm. Klein tapped the edge of the mottled table as he muttered silently. Having deduced this, it made his search much easier. This was because he didn't need to search the extensive waters. All he needed to do was focus on the different islands around those waters. With a change in thought, a blue gem at the tip of the Sea God Scepter in Klein's hand lit up. On the waters which no longer had the fishing boat, the crimson moonlight shone down on the deep blue waves that were slowly rising. Suddenly, splashes silently surged upwards as an exaggerated eye looking up into the sky surfaced. Beneath the eye was a massive silhouette. At the same time, all kinds of fish began surfacing nearby. They took in the indistinct halo that came scattering down, and they circled around before swimming down and headed in different directions. 10 seconds later, the waters in a 5 nautical mile radius returned to its previous state. The deep blue waves rose up to a high height again, awaiting the final eruption. Phew, this is a little draining. Klein raised his left hand to rub his temple. He wasn't only simply commandeering the sea creatures, he had also bestowed them with remnant Beyonder spirituality to a certain degree. It allowed them to transmit the scenes they saw by praying after they discovered any docked ships around the island. This wasn't too difficult or complicated for the Sea God Scepter, but it was burdensome and draining for the controller, Klein. Then, Klein selected a few praying believers situated on different islands around the archipelago. He then used the same method to command the sea creatures of the region. After doing all of this, he didn't bother throwing the Sea God Scepter into the junk pile before returning to the real world. He took off his coat and collapsed into bed. Having expended his spirituality to the limit, he believed that he would fall asleep immediately. Yet, his head began aching, preventing him from opening his eyes or falling asleep. Klein could clearly feel that his skin seemed overly sensitive. Lumps grew over his skin, and hidden beneath them were countless meat tendrils. Indeed, as Mr. Hangman said, if you drain your spirituality to 0 for 2 consecutive days, you'll definitely start hearing things and show signs of losing control. My body became a little abnormal just from reaching my limits once despite not even maintaining it for too long. Of course, it's because I've only recently advanced, and I haven't digested much. Furthermore, there's the excess from the potions from the prior sequences. Klein regained his train of thought as he attempted to cogitate the stacked spherical lights so as to calm the fatigue of his body and mind. Having gradually recovered, he finally fell asleep. By the time he woke up, it was in the middle of the night. At that moment, the winds were howling outside. The rain was pouring as the storm had finally unleashed its might after a prolonged period of brewing. And this wasn't a rare situation in Byam. Apart from that, the night was relatively serene. Klein went to the washroom to clear his bowels. Washing his hands and taking 4 steps counterclockwise, he once again appeared above the gray fog. He picked up the sea god scepter on the end of the long bronze table and began browsing through the scenes from the sea creatures. The scenes were that of ships, all located at different ports, harbors, or the shadows of different islands. Although Klein hadn't seen crazy Captain Connors Victor, he had previously learned of his traits and the various emblems of his pirate crew. Therefore, he wasn't afraid of failing to identify him. Scenes flashed past as he patiently scrutinized the details of the ships. About 10 minutes later, a look of unconcealed joy appeared in his eyes. He zoomed in on a scene as he pulled the orientation of the scene closer. He had found the suspected ship. The ship was docked at the back of Saimim Island, an island furthest from the Rorstad archipelago. Behind it was a towering cliff with churning waves below it. Its sails and flag had been reefed up, but there was a white skull emblem with an eye patch on the 2 sides of the ship. This was none other than the emblem of the crazy captain's pirate crew. Klein removed the spirit pendulum from his left wrist and made a confirmation with divination. The answer made him rejoice, as it was indeed Connors Victor's ship. And Crazy Captain only had 1 ship. It's no wonder that despite most adventurers at sea knowing that Crazy Captain is in contact with the kingdom's human traffickers and slave merchants, the Church of Storm's investigations of the colony disappearances didn't point to him. He only has a bounty of 3,300 pounds. The pirate crew only has 1 ship, so it just looks like it's a small business. It's impossible for him to do large-scale human trafficking. What should I do next? Klein first sighed silently before considering his angle of investigation. His first reaction was to summon a massive undersea creature, hitch a ride on something akin to a whale, and head straight for Saimim Island while the storm continued. Then, he could infiltrate and use his powers as a marionettist to control crazy Captain Connors Victor without causing too much of a stir. But on careful thought, he felt that it was a rash decision. It wasn't a problem dealing with other pirates who weren't at the pirate admiral level, but since crazy Captain Connors Victor was involved with a terrifying matter like the Great Smog of Backland, he had to consider that Connors's normal actions were just a disguise. In consideration of how he might have another identity, with the ship concealing some secrets, there was a high chance that there was a trap that could deal with pirate admirals. Klein might not walk out alive despite being armed to the teeth if he made such a rash infiltration attempt. Should I summon myself and head over with the Sea God Scepter as a spirit body? This can avoid some accidents, as I can immediately end the summoning if anything goes wrong. However, the Sea God Scepter is essentially the Beyonder characteristic of a high-sequence Beyonder from the Storm Pathway. As long as it appears in the real world, it might attract Sea King John Cotman. This will prevent the situation from developing as I expect it to. Klein looked at the storm in the scene as he came up with a preliminary plan. Before that, he conjured a pen and paper and wrote the divination statement. Dealing with Connors Victor is very dangerous. Picking up the silver chain of the spirit pendulum, Klein reined in his thoughts and focused on the divination. Soon, he opened his eyes to see the topaz pendant turning clockwise at a high frequency and large amplitudes. This meant that dealing with Connors Victor was very dangerous. It's as I expected. Thankfully, I didn't rashly rush over. Klein picked up the Sea God Scepter and decided on executing the plan he had just thought of. It was to use the prayer scene and strike Connors Victor's ship with the Sea God Scepter from afar by using the cover of the storm. He would rouse the nest and force out its secret. After grasping the relevant situation, he would end the attacks before Sea King John Cotman sensed the abnormality or arrived at the scene. Klein wouldn't feel disappointed if Connors Victor unfortunately landed in the hands of the Sea King. This was because he would have to think of the means to pass the information to the 3 churches after he figured out the truth of the Great Smog of Backland. If Crazy Captain successfully escaped, Klein would have pried into his secrets by rousing the nest. He could then subsequently formulate a plan of attack. Klein slowly exhaled as he watched the ship bob about with the dark crashing waves before raising the sea god's scepter high in the air. At the tip of the scepter, the blue gems that circled around it had begun to emit a bright light. Chapter 7:11. The storm attacks Simim Island. Under the towering cliff, dark sea waters were being roused by the surrounding waves as they churned about considerably. On crazy Captain Connors Victor's ship named the Single-Eyed Skull, a few pirates donned cloaks as they pulled up their hats. The rain pattered down heavily on them as they fought against winds that could lift a child, in order to walk out the cabin and inspect the ship to prevent any accidents from happening. Their cloaks were made of linen, but their surfaces were smeared with an already hardened sticky liquid. The raindrops were unable to permeate through that layer and could only flow down onto the deck. The liquid was Donningsman tree sap, produced from the southern continent's rainforest. It was naturally water-resistant and was quite commonly seen. It was originally rather cheap, but after a research team last year suspected that it had beneficial effects on hair growth, its price skyrocketed. In such weather it's suitable to be inside the Red Theater, drinking liquor, smoking weed, and having women in your arms. A pirate looked out of the shipboard and grumbled. His companion echoed him as he pulled at his cloak's hood. I heard there's a bunch of new arrivals at the Red Theater. I really want to give them a try. How did you learn of that? Another pirate asked in passing. He was met with a chuckle. I heard it from the boss. It's not like you have no idea what Captain's business is. That's why the boss knows plenty of human traffickers. They prefer to be called slave merchants. Speaking of which, I recall what happened that time. The pirate who spoke at the beginning wore a reminiscent look. Among the goods sent over, there was a young noble lady who had fled from her home. Her skin, figure, looks, I have no idea how to describe it. I still remember her to this day. What a pity that she committed suicide. As they spoke, they suddenly felt their vision brighten as they subconsciously looked up into the sky. Apart from the pattering rain, there was an abnormal silver bolt of lightning that was snaking its way through the dark clouds that hid the crimson moon and stars. Suddenly, a gigantic bolt of lightning that illuminated the surrounding waters smote down, heading straight for the Single-Eyed Skull. Boom! The bolts began to spread out randomly as the wooden ship burst into flames. Deafening thunder echoed in the pirates' ears. Right on the heels of that, silver bolts of lightning struck down like they were brandishing their claws. The tiny sailboat was instantly plunged into a lightning forest. At that moment, the thick lightning bolts that were about to interweave together had suddenly separated. They split apart in violation of the natural laws, and they failed to hit the Single-Eyed Skull. They hung close to the ship's surroundings before striking the pitch-black water, lighting up the surrounding sea as sizzling lightning bolts snaked out in a spectacle. The pirates on the deck suffered from the strike. One of them had been charred black like an overburnt piece of wood. Two collapsed as their bodies convulsed. There really is a problem. Above the gray fog, Klein couldn't help but sigh when he saw the scene of his lightning storm being dispelled. He was certain that this was a power at the level of a demigod. If he had rashly infiltrated the Single-Eyed Skull, even with creeping hunger, death knell, and Grozel's travels, there was no way he could put up an effective resistance against such strange powers. And by then, he wouldn't have the time to pray to himself and respond using the sea god's scepter above the gray fog. Taking a deep breath, Klein made all the blue gems on the tip of the white-boned scepter light up. Around the Single-Eyed Skull, there were two kinds of sounds in the storm. One was piercingly sharp, as though it could prick through one's eardrums and penetrate one's brain. The other was deep, sounding like a beating heart as it struck on one's spirit body. This gave the pirates an extremely uncomfortable experience, with many having the urge to vomit blood. However, this was only the beginning. The sound of splashing water intensified as a dark wave surged up to a height of nearly 10 meters, running opposite the island's cliffside. The wave was like a wall created by a deity as he pushed it toward the Single-Eyed Skull with an invisible hand. This was a tsunami that Klein created. It could already be considered a calamity. The whooshing sound of the waves sounded like explosions as the pirates on board looked at the dark sky outside, the churning clouds, and the massive tsunami. It felt like the apocalypse mentioned in mythical legends had arrived. They lost all will to save themselves. But as they were waiting in despair for the final judgment, a disturbance that didn't abide by logic or scientific laws appeared in the middle of the waves created by the tsunami. An indescribable vortex rapidly took form as it tore through the entire wave, causing the terrifying waves to rapidly collapse as a result. Amidst a rapturous rumble, a secondary wave threw the single-eyed skull up high into the air as the gigantic wave from before dispersed, spraying a portion of its load onto the ship. One of the masts broke, and the ship was in shambles. Even the deck was completely flooded. A strong wind suddenly stirred and swept up the pirates, turning into a hurricane that exceeded its own limits, pushing the airborne single-eyed skull further towards the sea. The ship began to ride the squall as it flew across the sky, covering a distance of several nautical miles without landing in the undulating waters. It was as though it was an airship that continued stably proceeding forward. Klein was amazed at the demigod or sealed artifact of the corresponding level inside the single-eyed skull for nullifying the tsunami. He sighed at his lacking sequence, as he couldn't create the destructive tsunami that Calvetua had previously created, despite stirring the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog. In the meantime, he controlled the hurricane and ensured that the single-eyed skull didn't lose its support and plummet, afraid that it would leave his 5 nautical mile range of influence. At that moment, his goal wasn't to destroy the single-eyed skull, nor was it to capture crazy Captain Connors Victor, but to force out the demigod or sealed artifact hidden inside the ship. A powerhouse or item at this level was scarce in the world. By seeing their appearance, he would know who they were sooner or later, as well as which organization they belonged to. And this provided the subsequent direction for the investigation regarding the Great Smog of Backlund. I hope it's not from the seer pathway. Otherwise, who knows if it's his true face or not. However, this is also a good thing. Since I'm investigating the truth of the Great Smog, I'll figure out what Nsangwil is doing, and I'll make preparations for my subsequent revenge. I'll also be able to successfully find the Bizarro Sorcerer Potion formula and main ingredients. As Klein silently sighed, he made the gem on the tip of the sea god scepter emit a pure azure light. With a hum, the single-eyed skull's flight experienced a change. It plummeted like a roar and didn't even manage to glide. Suddenly, it turned very, very light, landing on the sea's surface like a feather caressing a human's face. At that moment, Klein, who had exhausted plenty of spirituality, was just about to muster his remaining strength to create another tsunami when he heard an explosive boom from the scene. It was a terrifying sonic boom. Furthermore, it was different from normal sonic booms, as though it was mixed with the howling sounds of the wind. It was from Sea King John Cotman. Although he was still a distance away, he wielded mastery of these waters, so he could exert his influence across space while he rushed over. This was a Sequence 3 saint who was close to that of an angel. The terrifying sonic boom sent the single-eyed skull flying out. There was no hesitation on whether it would harm anyone. After all, there was nothing wrong with striking down on pirates. Meanwhile, Klein felt a psyche that was so potent that it was terrifying as it swept across the area in search of any spots that appeared abnormal. It caused the scene before his eyes to be affected as everything turned indistinct. After resisting another blast, Klein calmly and rationally ended the response. He shut down the corresponding prayer scene before throwing the sea god scepter into the junk pile. The gap isn't anything trivial. If Sea King didn't appear, I wouldn't have the confidence in forcing out that demigod. My sequence is still too low, giving me troubles when using the scepter, as it's overly burdensome. However, at sea, the storm pathway is really powerful. They're practically mobile calamities. The powers displayed by that demigod had the key elements of distortion, confusion, loaning, and violation of normality. It appears to be the Black Emperor paths of the divine. Others might not realize it, but I have the corresponding card of blasphemy. It definitely isn't only a Sequence 5 mentor of confusion. Account of the Fallen? The military has a portion of the potion formula for the Black Emperor pathway, but it seems to be limited to the first 5 sequences. They lack sequences 4 and above. Although Klein failed to force the demigod or corresponding sealed artifact out, he had gained a certain number of clues from their reaction. He suspected that a particular faction in the royal family wasn't only cooperating with the demonist sect and in Sanguil, but it was also secretly in cahoots with a faction that wielded most of the sequences of the Black Emperor pathway. The descendants of Solomon or Trunsoist. Is King of the Five Seas Nast involved in this? Klein was in serious thought when he heard overlapping prayers in his ear. It broke his train of thought as he instinctively emanated his spirituality and touched the rippling light beside his chair. Then he saw Danitz. This well-known pirate had his eyes closed as he piously prayed to the Fool. Klein took out his pocket watch in a daze and took a few looks at the time to confirm that it was almost 3 in the morning. Is he nuts? Why is he praying in the middle of the night? Does he not want me to sleep? Klein watched carefully in exasperated amusement and discovered that Danitz looked tipsy. There was even faint singing echoing outside. The crew members of the Golden Dream are having another bonfire party? Are they celebrating the departure of Gehrman Sparrow? To think they celebrated all the way into the middle of the night. Klein instantly understood why Danitz was praying at that moment. He took a deep breath as he emanated his will into the halo, saying in a deep voice, "Those who say my name are on my mind." Sea King John Cotman arrived at Saimim Island as he began searching for the abnormal tsunami that had happened here, as well as the ship that belonged to an unknown pirate crew. He was certain that there was a demigod on board that ship. This tall and brawny cardinal of the Church of Storms with thick, dark blue hair, a high-ranking deacon of the mandated Punisher, clenched his fists as the dark clouds in the sky cracked open, sending crimson sunlight scattering across the sea. After identifying the positions of the stars, John Cotman flew in a particular direction. Suddenly, his speed slowed down because he saw a pirate's ship with a flag fluttering with the single-eyed skull emblem. The ship wasn't manned by anyone as it drifted in the wind. Scarlet flames were everywhere on it, along with charred corpses. In the middle of one of the masts, a middle-aged man was tied to it. He wore a triangular hat and a black eye patch. His exposed eye was widened and filled with horror. A wooden pole had impaled him in his chest as blood dyed everything. His life and spirit body had completely dissipated. Chapter 7:12. The loyal Alger situated beyond the storm, the Golden Dream had crimson-red moonlight shine through the thin clouds and onto one of its rooms which was dark and unlit. Danitz was standing beside his bed, motionless. It was as though he had encountered the Beyonder powers resembling Medusa's petrifying gaze. He couldn't help but grind his teeth loudly as his feet indiscernibly trembled. An endless grayish-white fog and an indistinct figure that stood high above everything, saying the awe-inspiring words, "Those who say my name are on my mind," filled his mind. There really was a response. There really was a response. Danitz's lips quivered as he muttered silently to himself. He felt that his calves had gone soft. This was the first time he was receiving a response from a prayer. He was frightened out of his wits. He long knew that the Fool was an unknown existence, the figure whom the secret organization backing Gehrman Sparrow believed in, and that he had already made a connection due to chanting his honorific name. If he had any actions of disloyalty or betrayal, he would immediately die a baffling death. But this knowledge stemmed from the knowledge Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina had taught him. He had never encountered similar situations before, and he had never imagined that an unknown existence would respond to him. When the fog, figure, and voice suddenly appeared before his eyes and ears, he learned for the first time that mighty existences would directly respond to their believers. Yes, deep down, Danitz had unknowingly changed the unknown existence into a mighty existence. Just as he recovered from his shock, he hurriedly took a few deep breaths as he attempted to pace about to relieve the remnant horrors in his heart. However, just as he took a stride with his right foot, he discovered that his legs had gone limp. All he could do was collapse onto his bed before barely managing to turn around to sit up. It really is a magnificent existence. It's real, Danitz muttered softly as he came to a clear realization that he had involved himself in something serious. Back in the book world, As he had only chanted the honorific name without discovering any abnormalities, all he felt was fear having known of the possible outcomes. Now, he was facing a hidden danger that finally outlined itself, as well a future he couldn't see clearly. How could he not plunge into an inescapable pit of extreme fear? After an unknown period of time, Danitz exhaled as he consoled himself. It might not be a bad thing. At the very least, Gehrman Sparrow is still living, and he's leading quite a good life. Upon having this thought, he forced a smile. I'm a member of a secret organization, and in the future, a person blessed by a magnificent existence. As his thoughts raced, Danitz decided to pray every morning when he woke up. He believed that no existence would dislike a pious believer. Of course, he would keep in mind the revelation and often pray inwardly. The next morning, Klein woke up normally, having exhausted himself the previous night. He slowly got out of bed and saw that the skies were blue and the ground outside was wet. The entire world seemed to be cleansed by water, making it abnormally fresh. However, the disorderly leaves, broken branches, and all sorts of trash were an indication that it wasn't a peaceful night. After washing up, Klein wore an ordinary Loanese face, ordered a cup of Gurney sap, something that originated from Saimim Island, and a rather heavy choice for breakfast, tiataiva, to make up for his previous night's expenditure. As he drank the beverage that resembled lemonade with sugar and milk, he ate the fresh, fragrant meal that mixed mutton and fish together, along with the sweet and slightly sour flavor of the fruit. Klein held up the newspapers provided by the inn with great pleasure as he read through the papers starting with the Sonia Morning Post and News Report. At the end of breakfast, he flipped open Strange Cases, a paper that was rather popular among adventurers, and he saw a striking article headline, Bloody Infighting Amidst Storm. According to sources, there was intense infighting on Crazy Captain Connors Victor's Single-Eyed Skull. The pirates executed Crazy Captain and killed each other, and reports say that no one survived. All of this evil was concealed by the terrifying storm last night. No one was aware of the conflict until the Single-Eyed Skull was found drifting around Saimim Harbor. The article attached an unclear photo, seemingly captured from the harbor in secret. The photo's Single-Eyed Skull's characteristics stood out at once. It was heavily damaged and many spots were charred black. Only a single mast remained intact, while the middle mast had a figure with a triangular hat pinned to it. It's Connors Victor. He died just like that? Klein's pupils constricted as he seriously contemplated. It can almost be confirmed that there was a demigod on the ship last night. When he saw that Crazy Captain was targeted, or with Sea King in pursuit, he could only care for himself. Unable to bring Connors with him, he decisively silenced him and destroyed all evidence. Klein, who had plans on continuing his pursuits of Crazy Captain, felt dejected. He realized that although the trail of clues hadn't been completely cut off, there was little of it left. The only matter he was aware of at that moment was that the demigod likely belonged to the Black Emperor pathway. From the intensity of the storm last night, the Single-Eyed Skull was likely sent to the harbor by Sea King John Cotman so as to do any follow-up investigations. I wonder if they will have any additional findings. Yes, I can get Mr. Hanged Man to keep an eye out for it in the Church of Storms. There's no need to inform him since the tarot gathering will be this afternoon. The world can directly commission him to do so. Klein quickly made up his mind before downing the rest of the Gurney sap. Then, he returned to his room and planned to retrieve the radio transceiver which he had placed above the gray fog for an extended period of time to contact a Rhodes. He wanted to see if it had any other clues regarding the Bizarro Sorcerer Potion formula. Having left Oravi's East Sea, which was also where the Aurora Order's demigod had previously targeted him, Klein now dared to use items with the gray fog's aura. However, he knew very well that he couldn't do it frequently, and each use couldn't be for too long. Otherwise, there was the possibility of the true creator detecting it. Due to this reason and his wariness against Rhodes, he planned on doing whatever he could do himself, and he would seek advice from others if possible. He only planned on playing the question-and-answer game if he was out of options. In the Blue Avenger, which was docked at the Resistance's private harbor, Alger planned on getting one last resupply before his return to Pasu Island. After instructing his crew which items to purchase, He changed into local clothing, and he went straight for Byam. After circling a few times, he came to the Cathedral of Waves, planning on reporting to Diocese Bishop, Chogo, about recent developments. Although he was returning to Pasu Island and reporting his work to the upper echelons of the church, he knew very well who his immediate superior was. He knew that he needed to act appropriately and not make his superior believe that he was skipping the chain of command by directly establishing relations with the upper echelons. Chogo remained hale and hearty as he was very pleased with Alger's proactive reporting. After he heard that, he said with a brisk tone, "There's no need to worry about it. It's just routine reporting. I've already informed His Eminence Cotman that you're devoted to the Lord and are loyal to the church. You're one of the most trusted captains, and His Eminence Cotman will inform the Council of Cardinals of this." He paused, but without giving Alger any time to speak, he continued, "In addition, there's another mission. Investigate people who are intimately tied to crazy Captain Connors Victor. This is a mission directly issued by His Eminence Cotman. You have to take it seriously." Investigate people related to crazy Captain? Alger was puzzled, but he didn't question it. Instead, he struck his right fist on his left breast and said, "Yes, Your Excellency." The grizzled Chogo nodded and thought for 2 seconds before asking, "Do you know Gehrman Sparrow?" This question sounded like a bolt out of the blue. It left Alger's pupils constricting as he nearly lost control on the spot. Thankfully, he was mentally strong, allowing him to barely maintain his normal state. "I've heard of him. He's been very famous recently. Not only has he hunted Wormtongue Mither and seriously injured Tracy, but he has also boarded Catlia's future." Alger droned on to hide the stirrings in his heart. Chogo made a terse acknowledgement. "You were at sea, so you're a little behind on the news. Gehrman Sparrow killed Curtius at Toscarter last week and obtained his bounty. That pirate was indeed a devil, a Sequence 5 devil." "Curtius? Agalito's second mate?" Alger asked with very honest emotions. He knew that Curtius was suspected to be a Sequence 5, but he didn't know that he was of the devil pathway. And the fact he was both a Sequence 5 and a devil meant plenty of things. It meant that he was difficult to kill, which meant that Gehrman Sparrow had very likely killed Curtius during a sudden encounter. This meant that Gehrman Sparrow was already at the pinnacle of Sequence 5s. If it wasn't because he was seeking to purchase the Sequence 4 potion formula, I might even suspect that he had become a demigod. Alger thought, feeling perturbed. He was alarmed to realize that in a week, the world had obtained the Sequence 5 Ocean Songster potion formula and main ingredient, killed a Sequence 5 devil, and might very possibly have a Sequence 6 notary potion formula in hand as well. How did he do it? Alger realized that he was feeling a little frightened of the world. Of course, it wasn't something unacceptable for him. This was because he knew that the world was Mr. Fool's blessed representative. And Mr. Fool's blessed clearly wasn't a single person. If one was responsible for the notary potion formula, while another was responsible for the ocean songster, then it was possible that Gehrman Sparrow had only killed Curtius. Although this similarly left one apprehensive, it didn't seem like a fabricated story. Chogo nodded solemnly. Yes, Agalito's lack of reaction implies something. Focus on gathering information about Gehrman Sparrow. All right, Your Excellency. Alger bowed reverently, having already decided to be perfunctory with the mission as much as he could. Inside the inn, Klein placed the radio transceiver on the table. Before long, rushed clacking sounds were heard. Chapter 713. 3 questions. Amidst the clacking sounds, the radio transceiver spewed out new illusory paper. On the paper were words composed of Loanese. "Great Master, your loyal and humble servant, Rhodes, has finally caught up to you. There's no need to be so excited. Oh, the way Rhodes speaks is as professional as always. He didn't express his bitterness about not being able to contact me for prolonged periods of time, nor did he question me about why I haven't been looking for it. It directly blamed itself by claiming that it hadn't caught up to me. It makes me feel a little guilty. But I still need to be wary." Klein was momentarily at a loss for an answer. Rhodes didn't wait as it used the radio transceiver to produce an emoticon of carefully peeking out on the illusory paper. "Great Master, the ruler above the spirit world, your servant has sensed that you are one step closer to returning to your holy throne, am I right? This fellow has evolved really quickly. He's already using colored text to form a nascent form of emoticons. From a Rhodes's point of view, I'm a true god taking steps to find myself. That's why, although it can clearly sense that I'm only a sequence 5, it still treats me with respect and is even more humble. Klein understood that the mirror was deliberately asking a question, so he nodded in a frank manner. Yes. You have already answered my question. As an exchange and a rule that I need to overlook, you can raise a question to me. A Rhodes typed quickly in response before adding a smiley face. Klein didn't hesitate and asked directly, where can the potion formula for Bizarro Sorcerer be found? The illusory paper spat out a long paragraph of complicated symbols before turning into a mirror as it represented a realistic scene. It was a dark cathedral without any natural light source. Inside it was a bunch of squirming things that were all so blurry. It looked as though it was a pencil drawing that had been wiped by an eraser, preventing any exact details to be seen. However, Rhodes added a bunch of text at the bottom of the scene. This is Zeratul. In his advancement to Sequence 1, Attendant of Mysteries, he lost control and became a monster. However, Great Master, you have to be careful. He is a very crafty person. Perhaps everything about him is just an act with a purpose. I'm unable to look at him directly as it will bring me harm. Aside from him, you will be unable to obtain the potion formula from any demigod from the secret order. This is because back then Zeratul would directly provide the high sequence potion to them, and there's almost no way to use any Beyonder methods to reverse divine it. What a detailed answer, and it even gave me the additional knowledge that the sequence 1 corresponding to the seer pathway is Attendant of Mysteries. Does it mean being an angel that serves upon mystery? From the looks of it, the secret order approach can only work by directly facing Zeratul to obtain the potion formula. And I'm not even capable of viewing him directly. It's no wonder the Snake of Fate Will Septon told me to find the crazy Zeratul without mentioning the secret order. Klein was moved by Rhodes's attitude. If he didn't feel that he lacked the level and strength to commandeer this sealed artifact, he even planned on truly treating it as his servant. Amidst the clear clicking sounds, another segment of the illusory piece of paper appeared, presenting another scene. It was a towering mountain peak. On it was a swath of dilapidated palaces. Inside it was a gigantic stone chair. Klein was very familiar with this scene. Without Rhodes's footnote, he knew what it represented. The Antigonus family's treasure hidden at the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range. White paper continued being spat out as a new scene was presented. Just like a movie, it had changes in the camera angle. The first scene that appeared in Klein's eyes was a lofty Gothic-style bell tower and beautiful palaces around it. The former represented the Bell of Order, and the latter represented the Sodila Palace. They were landmark buildings in Backlund. The scene changed, and soon, there was a new building on the paper. It was a pure black cathedral with 2 symmetrical bell towers. The scene of the cathedral's interior grew larger, and soon, it presented the entirety of the interior. It was then fixed at a pair of iron black doors that swung open. The door was abnormally heavy, and on it were 7 dark sacred emblems, as though they were guards of the tenebrous heaven. Cheney's Gate, St. Samuel Cathedral. Klein recognized the familiarly styled door. Based on the architectural style, he confirmed that the cathedral was the Church of the Evernight Goddesses headquarters of the Backlund Diocese, St. Samuel Cathedral. White paper was spat out and the scene changed as it plunged deep into the darkness. On an empty bookshelf built from bones, there sat an ancient notebook. It was a black hard-covered book. Klein recognized the notebook at once. It was the Antigonus family's notebook which had caused the death of the original Klein. After going round and round, everything came back full circle. Klein silently observed it for a moment, and after the scenes disappeared did he regain control of his thought processes. Yes, back then, the members of the Aurora Order were able to see the clown potion formula from the notebook. Having been acknowledged by it, the content presented to me will definitely be completely different from before when I flipped through it. It should have the arcane sorcerer potion formula. It just lacks the ingredients or characteristics. So this notebook has been sealed behind St. Samuel Cathedral's Chinese gate all this time. To get it from there, the difficulty in doing so wouldn't be lower than finding Zeratul and facing him directly. Back then, there were high-sequence beyonders involved in the Great Smog of Backlund. After I reported the matter to the Backlund Diocese's church through Miss Justice, the matter was quickly quelled. This is sufficient enough to prove that the Backlund Diocese has plenty of power. They have no lack of demigods or sealed artifacts. Yes, regardless, I'll need to return to Backlund first and see if there are any opportunities. In contrast, I'd prefer not to head to the Hornacis mountain range. Reining in his thoughts, Klein looked at the radio transceiver which had turned dark and solemn. Last night, who was the demigod on crazy Captain Connor's Victor's ship? Clacking sounds quickly sounded as the illusory paper from before vanished as new ones were spat out. The content on the piece of paper was likewise a realistic scene. On an exquisite brass chandelier, 5 candles of different heights spread their warmth and light. A middle-aged man wearing a triangular hat and black eye patch stood before a cabinet that stored grape wine, champagne, and tequila. He was humbly looking opposite him. Opposite him was a tall figure in a black cloak. Its face was completely hidden beneath the hood. The figure didn't seem to have a real head, only a blob of heavily distorted darkness that was embedded above the neck. Thanks to the portraits from Bounty Notices, Klein recognized the one-eyed man to be crazy Captain Connors. His disheveled and oily hair cascaded down and happened to cover his neck. Opposite him is likely that demigod. But he deliberately disguised himself and did the corresponding anti-divination preparations. For a Rhodes to be able to produce a scene of this level is already impressive enough. Klein wasn't too disappointed. Instead, he carefully memorized the figure's build. More than 1.85 meters tall, but less than 1.9 meters. Rather long arms, and when hanging his hands down, it almost reaches the knees. The broad shoulders prop up the cloak. The feet are faced outwards to a certain degree. As an expert in disguises, Klein believed that when a person disguised himself and prepared a certain level of anti-divination measures, there was a high chance that he wouldn't take note of disguising his build, especially when one's body didn't have any particular traits. Therefore, this can provide a certain amount of clues. This allows Klein to find the person familiar when he sees the target. Very good. It's your turn to ask. After keeping that in mind, Klein stopped scrutinizing the figure as he waited for a Rhodes's question with piqued interest. He was curious as to how a Rhodes would continue breaking through his image of him. The typing sounds slowed down as it seemed to appear hesitant. Bit by bit, the illusory white paper was spat out. Great Master, see, can I say something to you? Yes, Klein answered the question, puzzled. He began to look forward to what a Rhodes had to say. The sound of typing hastened as it exuded an obvious sense of warmth. On the illusory paper, a single line appeared, Great Master, happy birthday. This is belated. Your current body was born on March 4, 1327. I originally wanted to wish you a happy birthday at midnight of that day, but I failed to keep up with you. It's a topic that really exceeded my expectations. I even forgot about my own birthday. The corners of Klein's lips twitched as he was at a loss for words. He had received the original Klein's memory fragments and received parts of his emotions. He knew the birthday, but for a person who led a solitary life, why would he remember such things? This fellow is actually the first person to wish me a happy birthday? Benson and Melissa must be feeling more upset today. The interview should have ended in February. I wonder if Benson succeeded in becoming a civil servant. Klein felt poignant as the way he looked at the radio transceiver warmed up. He thought for a moment as he calmly asked, Third question, your origins. The typing sounds paused for 2 seconds before sounding out again. A white piece of paper was spat out as a new scene surfaced. Large amounts of black sticky liquid spewed out from the ground as they spread outwards in a distorted manner. They grew different numbers of arms and legs before becoming strange monsters that charged ahead. During this process, a speck of light was shot out along with the black liquid before landing on a rock, to which it rapidly fused together, turning into a mirror with ancient patterns and black gems adorning its two sides. What kind of strange scene is this? This was how a Rhodes was born? What was that speck of light? Where did it originate from? It does seem like a beyonder characteristic. Klein came up with a preliminary interpretation of the scene. The typing sounds didn't stop as another line appeared. Great Master, do you have any other questions? Taking note of the time, Klein shook his head. No. You have finished answering the questions, and it's time for me to leave. Great Master, the ruler above the spirit world, your loyal and humble servant, a Rhodes, looks forward to serving you again and hopes to be able to continue following in your footsteps. At the end of the illusory piece of paper, a hand-waving emoticon was presented. Chapter 7:14. New diary pages. Inside the quiet room in the inn, the dark and silent radio transceiver instantly returned back to normal as its surroundings stopped being eerie. Klein busily set up the ritual and sacrificed it above the gray fog before having the time to consider the answers he had received. According to the clues provided by Rhodes, and combining the answers from Mr. Azik and Will Ossepton, Klein had a basic idea on how he should proceed. It wasn't just because he wished to return to Backlund for some rest and reorganization, but because he viewed the large city as a main locale that he would spend a long period of time being active in. He wanted to see if he could steal the Antigonus family's notebook from the Church of the Evernight Goddesses, St. Samuel Cathedral. If he confirmed that there weren't any solutions, he would attempt to switch to neighboring beyonder pathways, but if that was impossible, he had no choice but to take the final route, head to the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range. I definitely can't use my identity as Sherlock Moriarty when I'm back in Backlund unless I wish to dig out in Zangwill or the royal family faction that's hiding in the darkness. However, when contacting people I'm familiar with or using the resources of the Church of Steam, I can transform back into Sherlock Moriarty. In short, I have to create a new identity. Furthermore, it has to be completely separate from Gehrman Sparrow. I won't directly return to Pritz Harbor this time. I'll make a detour to Desi Bay and make sure that no one can figure out my background. Klein's thoughts raced and he soon came up with a clear train of thought. After determining the next steps of action to take, he planned on drawing some blood and heading above the gray fog to explore Grozel's travels using his spirit body, but in consideration that there was a tarot gathering in the afternoon, he lay back in bed and took the time to rest and relax. The future smoothly cruised through the undulating waves as Admiral of Stars Katlia stood by the window, watching the scenery that seemed to go on without end. And by the deck, there were Nina's exasperated shouts from time to time. She would be angrily scolding Frank Lee for producing a bunch of fast-growing, beef-flavored mushrooms that enjoyed eating fish. Katlia sighed silently as she nudged the heavy glasses on her nose bridge. At that moment, her spiritual perception was suddenly triggered as she looked down at her study desk. At some point in time, a few pieces of yellowed paper had appeared there. The Emperor's diary entries. She finally sent a messenger over. Katlia turned around in delight and picked up the few pieces of paper that were akin to a preliminary probe. By 3 in the afternoon, having memorized the symbols, Katlia saw the illusory crimson light surge at her like a tide, drowning her within. Under a high dome propped up by stone columns, Katlia saw similar red beams soar up, transforming into indistinct figures. She didn't look carefully, as she realized that a pair of familiar glasses had naturally appeared over her nose bridge. It was almost a perfect replica of the one from the outside world. Then, she caught Miss Justice elegantly stand up from the corner of her eye. Miss Justice briskly greeted the figure at the seat of honor. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool. Audrey was in a good mood recently. After she returned to her family's castle, as an obedient daughter, she helped her mother, Lady Caitlin, resolve some psychological problems that stemmed from her age and physical condition. She received extremely good feedback, allowing her to conclude more of the acting principles for psychiatrist. Amongst them, the most important principle was to help others resolve psychological issues. She suspected that this was the reason why the potion's name was psychiatrist and not psychologist. Miss Justice is very happy. Klein appeared infected as he nodded with a smile as a response. During this process, he noticed that Mr. Hanged Man appeared to be preoccupied with concerns. He looked like he was hesitating and struggling, having not made up his mind. This means that Mr. Hanged Man is able to buy the Ocean Songster's potion formula and main ingredient, but he will have to pay a huge price. I thought he would request to pay for it in installments. The fool Klein reined in his gaze without any signs of unrest as he surveyed the area. After Miss Justice was done with her greeting, Katlia looked towards the end of the long bronze table. Honorable Mr. Fool, I found 3 pages of Roselle's diary. Here it comes. I wonder if the 3 diary pages specially selected by Queen Mystic will be valuable. For instance, providing clues to the card of blasphemy for the seer pathway. This will be able to provide me with another alternative. Klein was filled with anticipation as he calmly and naturally said, "Very good. You can think of a request." "Yes, Mr. Fool." Katlia replied in an impeccable manner before requesting to conjure the contents of the diary pages. Upon seeing her behavior and thinking about how she acted in the dream, Klein was rather gratified. He felt like a teacher having successfully reformed a student. This is the first time Ma'am Hermit is providing Emperor Roselle's diary entries. With the standards and ability she has showcased, it's impossible for her to have failed to find it in the past. Yes, in the past, she was more of an observer. After being punished by Mr. Fool, she has truly integrated into our tarot club. Together with how Katlia had performed last week, Audrey made a judgment. Meanwhile, she sensed that Mr. Hanged Man didn't seem normal. He looked like he was anticipating something but was also unable to bring himself to part with something. She was rather intrigued. Klein didn't wait too long before the 3 diary pages were conjured and came into his hands. Derek and the other members instinctively fell silent, so as to not disturb Mr. Fool's reading. February 9th. Today is Bornova's birthday. He's already a healthy, strong, honest, and kind young man. His piousness has won the church's favor. Everyone is congratulating me, saying that Bornova will definitely become a saint. They praise him for how pure and flawless his faith is. I should be very happy, but I can't hide my dismay. I wish that my children can be more human, to have more emotions. I hope that they can be themselves, and not just a believer of a deity. However, almost everyone believes from the bottom of their hearts that Bornova's present state is excellent. Matilda is the same. Likewise for Seal. Most of my noble officials share the same feelings. Only Bernadette shares my point of view. She has told me in private that she believes a person should be more self-centered, as long as they don't harm others. Recalling the words Zeratul had said during Bornova's birth, as well as the premonition I've had after becoming a demigod, my heart is turning heavier. Adorable angel. Haha, what an adorable angel. Is this you being wary of me? Is this how you are attempting to control me? No, you can probably never understand the pride inside me. To me, so what if you're a deity? I can replace you. February 11th, contact with Zeratul was fruitless again. Ever since he obtained that Antigonus notebook, the number of times this secret order leader appears has been decreasing. I've no idea what secret he's scheming. Anyway, he will definitely not tell me. February 12th. I made a mystical item very suitable for Bernadette. This can allow her to effectively avoid the hidden sage's nagging, as long as she doesn't proactively pray and seek a response. Yes, this item seems to be able to help saints enter the easternmost front of the Sonia Sea where the battlefield of the gods is. It prevents one from being influenced by the true creator's ravings, and that place likely hides the secret to the forsaken land of God. I was only making a present for my daughter out of fun. To think that it has such powerful effects. Bernadette, your dad is really the best artisan in the world. Best artisan? Does this mean that the Emperor had already reached sequence 2 of the Savant pathway when he wrote this diary entry, that he had become an angel? With the god of steam and machinery present, this is the peak an artisan can attain. It's no wonder that Queen Mystic can freely enter and exit the battlefield of the gods. So it's because of a gift from the Emperor. Indeed, a child with parents is like a treasure. Klein felt wistful. In addition, he could sense Emperor Roselle's repressed and angry feelings from the diary entry. He used his comprehension skills that were honed from his previous life to figure out what was written in between the lines. After he became an angel, the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery obstructed him and suppressed him. The God of Steam and Machinery had exerted some influence on his youngest son, Bornova, making him become the most devout believer and appointing him as someone who could become an angel and enter the land of perfection. And this not only made Emperor Roselle submit to the suppression while having misgivings, but this had also stirred thoughts of rebellion in him. The emperor later became a public enemy of the world because of this rebellion? Klein nodded inwardly. Meanwhile, he noticed a matter regarding Zeratul. He suspected that the miracle invoker only began aiming for sequence 1 after he obtained the Antigonus family's notebook. For this, he planned many things, but something happened during his advancement, turning him into a monster. Of course, just as Erode said, Zeratul might not have lost control. He could be hiding something or plotting something. After quickly scanning through it, Klein flipped the page and looked back. It wasn't continuous, and it was brand new content. October 5th. A few primordial moon believers were caught by the Black Suits organization I established. They failed to complete the corresponding sacrificial ritual. Their behavior has intrigued me, as their strength seems to come directly from the Crimson Moon. Unfortunately, large amounts of data have confirmed that the Crimson Moon is really a satellite that's revolving around our planet. Then, how is it fusing physics and mystery together? With my present strength, it's not impossible to head for the Crimson Moon. At most, it will be troublesome and a little difficult, but it doesn't seem to be necessary. October 17th, I've finally made up my mind. I will attempt to switch to the neighboring Mystery Prior pathway. Only by doing so can I become a Sequence 1. I've always suspected that the Hidden Sage is only a conceptualized uniqueness. Due to some sort of accident, it became sentient and awakened. Therefore, this pathway's Sequence 1 position is likely still empty. Chapter 7:15. Madness in his later years. I've long obtained the potion formula of Knowledge Emperor from that most ancient organization. Now, it's time to seek the corresponding ingredients. It might already belong to a particular angel, and it might have fused with an object around it, turning into a warped and evil monster, or a chaotic and terrifying sealed artifact. In short, I have to be careful. It's best that I find a suitable helper. Knowledge Emperor. This Sequence 1 potion name is rather interesting. If I hadn't directly seen the blasphemy slate, I would have imagined that it belonged to the Reader pathway, making it belong to the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. Even stranger, these two pathways aren't switchable. I once discussed this matter with that mysterious leader and old Mr. Hermes. We basically came to a consensus and believe that the Reader pathway represents the omniscient part of omnipotent and omniscient. And the Mystery Prior's savant corresponds to knowledge itself, which is categorized into two aspects. One is more about mystery, while the other is more about reality. When I become a Knowledge Emperor, Bernadette can stop worrying about the Hidden Sage's infusion of knowledge. She can also stop being afraid of pursuing knowledge. The Emperor eventually switched to the Mystery Prior pathway? I wonder if he successfully became a Knowledge Emperor. Perhaps it's because of this that his ties with the Church of Steam completely fractured, making him the public enemy with no one to help him. All he could do was place his hopes on the Twilight Hermit Order. Klein thought poignantly as he came up with possible conjectures. Apart from that, he was rather interested in the Emperor's explanation of how the Reader pathway wasn't interchangeable with the Mystery Prior and Savant pathway. He believed that by deepening his understanding of it, he might be able to figure out the rules and rationale behind the interchangeability of Beyonder pathways. To the typical Beyonder, the Reader, Mystery Prior, and Savant pathway belong to the knowledge domain. There should be a very strong connection between them, yet the former is different. Reader belongs to the omniscient part of the phrase, omnipotent and omniscient. Then, the secret suppliant, which is the shepherd pathway, is the omnipotent part. Then, there must be a certain intersection between the two. For example, being potent as a result of being erudite, and being erudite as a result of being potent. Therefore, they can be interchanged. Starting off from this angle, the storm pathway can be understood as omnipotence in the sea, land, and air domain. The spectator corresponds to the psyche, making it a powerful supplement for storm. Then, why can the sun pathway be interchanged with them? Considering how there was an ancient sun god who was deemed to be omnipotent and omniscient, does this mean that the sun pathway is the foundation that accommodates omnipotent and omniscient? Yes. According to such a thought process, mystery prior and savant are different aspects of knowledge itself. That's why they can be interchanged. Then, how is assassin and hunter differentiated? What about the Evernight, death, and god of combat pathways? In moments, Klein thought of many things, but he didn't have the time or sufficient knowledge to delve deeper into his analysis. All he could do was temporarily throw the corresponding questions to the back of his mind and will the third diary page to the top of the stack. At a cursory glance, Klein suddenly became focused. This was because the diary page was very different from the past ones. It didn't have a date and the words were spaced apart. Because it was the original copy, the weight placed on the page when the words were penned was obviously out of the ordinary. Klein swept through the page as the contents were reflected in his mind. No. Impossible. How can that happen? If my predictions aren't wrong, I'm not the only one who met with that encounter. No. How can that happen? The thing that I saw tells me that everything will be destroyed. Likewise for everything I've created. I can't accept such an ending. I have to work hard to save myself. I can't rely on the 7 deities. As long as I ascend to the throne of Sequence 0, only then will I and the things I value be preserved. Should I attempt to pull Mr. Door back into the real world? Although he claims to be only a Sequence 1, I believe that he isn't just an ordinary Sequence 1. It's very likely that he will bring unexpected catastrophe upon me. The Chinese words, which were much larger than those on the first 2 pages, had occupied the yellowed piece of paper in a haphazard manner. There wasn't much content, but it left Klein's head throbbing painfully. Back when he was writing this diary entry, Emperor Roselle was very likely a Sequence 1 knowledge emperor. The content he wrote was infused with a potent sense of mystery and was colored with his emotions. This also meant that if Klein had read the contents in the real world, he might very well turn mentally unstable or go mad and lose control on the spot. Thankfully, Ma'am Hermit doesn't know Chinese. Otherwise, she would have mutated when she was memorizing the contents. Even if she doesn't understand Chinese, she must have found it especially tiring and draining. If one is exposed to it for extended periods of time, visual and auditory hallucinations can't be avoided. Furthermore, there's a high chance that early signs of losing control will appear. Klein thought, congratulating himself for his good luck. His focus quickly turned back onto the diary entry as a sense of puzzlement surfaced. What did the Emperor see that made him so emotional? His mood was also rather extreme. No, the agitation and rashness as seen in the words are a little abnormal. It doesn't match the image of someone who has occupied a high position for extended periods of time. It doesn't match the level of an angel. Even in his final days, he said that after he dies, he didn't care if floods deluged the heavens. He didn't lose his composure or appear that agitated back then. Who influenced him? Or did something corrupt and pollute his thoughts? Also, he mentioned that he's not the only one who met with that encounter. What is he referring to? Transmigration? It's true that he isn't the only one who transmigrated for no baffling reason. There's also me, or even more. As thoughts flashed through his mind, Klein didn't waste any time. He made the 3 diary pages vanish as he smiled at Katlia. Have you thought of the request? Katlia bowed in preparation as she said, I wish to know why Emperor Roselle went mad in his later years. Audrey, who was in the same row as her, blinked. She believed that she had heard wrongly, as she didn't expect Ma'am Hermit to immediately ask such a heavy question. Furthermore, how does she know that Emperor Roselle went mad in his later years? Also, she only handed 3 pages, so how can she ask a question of this magnitude? It doesn't abide by the principle of equivalent exchange. Audrey had many thoughts arise in her mind, but she didn't stop Ma'am Hermit's question. Instead, she waited for Mr. Fool's response with piqued interest and inexplicable excitement. Alger, Emlyn, and Furs similarly held their breaths. They cast their gaze at the end of the bronze table. Only Derek and the world seemed oblivious. Klein thought and chuckled. First, we need to accept reality. I'm not omniscient, nor am I omnipotent. He had said those words in a relaxed, self-deprecating manner, but the hermit and company didn't show any signs of unrest. Instead, they appeared even more reverent. To them, it was obvious that Mr. Fool wasn't omnipotent and omniscient. Ignoring their guesses regarding Mr. Fool's state, this hidden existence's honorific name didn't have any related descriptions that explained the problem. Furthermore, none of the present true gods and evil gods had honorific names that involved omnipotence and omniscience. After setting their expectations, Klein began to answer the hermit's question. I also wish to know what Roselle encountered in his later years. At present, it can be confirmed that due to an unknown cause and source of stimulation, Roselle cast his gaze on Sequence 0. He didn't explain what Sequence 0 corresponded to. In the Tarot Club, there were more people who knew of it than those who didn't. Even those who didn't know could have guessed something. Sequence 0. The Emperor wanted to become a god? It's no wonder that it's said that he went mad in his later years. Audrey knew what Sequence 0 meant as she instantly sighed. Likewise for Alger. Katlia clearly knew what Sequence 0 implied. She expressed her gratitude while in thought as she retracted her gaze. Sequence 0. Emlyn and Furs ruminated over the phrase, as though they had just realized that there was a position above Sequence 1 that belonged to true gods. Derek looked at Mr. Fool with a muddled expression. He didn't understand what was wrong with Emperor Roselle's attempt, someone who had a strong presence in history. In the City of Silver, if anyone had the chance, every resident would wish to become a Sequence 0 true god, so as to create a more sustainable living environment, or to lead everyone out of the Forsaken Land. Klein didn't elaborate as he leaned back into his chair and surveyed the area. You may begin. With that said, he controlled the world to look at Derek before smiling deeply. The notary potion formula you want has been acquired. Thank you, Mr. World. According to the agreement, I will remember the debt and await your request, Derek said sincerely. All right. Klein gave a response by controlling the world before making a show of him requesting Mr. Fool to conjure the formula. Before long, the potion formula was in Little Sun's hands. Derek received it in glee as he ravenously scanned the contents of the goatskin. Sequence 6, Notary. Main ingredients: 1 set of crystallized roots of the Tree of Elders, 5 feathers of a spirit-packed bird. Supplementary ingredients: 100 milliliters of radiant spirit-packed trees juice, 1 golden-rimmed sunflower, 1 white-rimmed sunflower, 5 drops of aqua fern juice. Without waiting for the others to speak, the world looked at Alger and said once more, as you know, I have your Ocean Songster potion formula and main ingredient. Audrey and company were momentarily dumbfounded. Katlia couldn't hide her alarm as she looked at the world. She vividly remembered that Gehrman Sparrow had just hunted Slaughterer Curtius a week ago. How did he obtain the Ocean Songster potion formula and main ingredient? Don't tell me he killed an Ocean Songster? That would be considered a quasi-high-ranking member in the Church of Storms. It's only been a week. Katlia found this unrealistic. Chapter 716, Island and Ruins. Mr. World has also obtained the potion formula and main ingredient for Ocean Songster. He's really impressive. Derek moved his gaze from the goatskin in his hand and looked at the gentleman seated at the other end of the long bronze table. In his mind, the world's toughness had reached a whole new level, one that could match the weaker members in the 6-member council. Furs was also similarly astonished as her poignancy grew deeper. She remembered that back when she first joined the Tarot Club, Mr. World gave her the impression that he was gloomy and reserved. Apart from that, nothing stood out. In the subsequent gatherings, he began to show that he was experienced and knowledgeable, as well as possessing rather impressive abilities. At a glance, he was a senior Beyonder who had experienced many things, just second to Mr. Hanged Man amongst the Tarot Club members. This image had already formulated in Furz's mind, but in recent months, Miss Magician was repeatedly surprised by the world. He was first capable of obtaining rather important information, and following that, he sold plenty of Beyonder characteristics in a short span of time. He made her involuntarily suspect if he was a Beyonder assassin who was active in the mysterious world. She feared him from the bottom of her heart, but along with that came happiness. This was because it meant that she could commission Mr. World with certain requests that would be met with high chances of success. When the new member, the Hermit, appeared, Furs even imagined that Mr. World's halo would be blanketed by this powerful lady. But to her surprise, he had snatched the limelight and blinded everyone with his magnificence. To obtain the Ocean Songster Potion formula, its corresponding main ingredient, and the Notary Potion formula was seemingly impossible by human standards. He really is impressive. I admire this kind of quiet and ordinary person who is actually very capable. Sigh, I wonder when I can become a Viscount. After this hunting competition, the winner will receive a prize that's likely something that will allow a sanguine to become stronger. Emlyn White quickly turned his thoughts back to himself. As Audrey was sighing in amazement, she was puzzled about a matter from before. Why is the impressive Mr. World not searching for Emperor Roselle's diary pages? He's not like Ma'am Hermit. He has already joined the Tarot Club for quite some time, and he doesn't need to observe. It's not like he doesn't have any requests that don't require him to search for Emperor Roselle's diary pages to obtain something from Mr. Fool. Then, why isn't he searching for them? Has he privately submitted them? What? Imperceptibly, Audrey felt that Mr. World and Mr. Fool had a connection to a certain degree, but she wasn't able to confirm it, as there were just too many possibilities. At this moment, Alger turned to the seat of honor after a few seconds of silence. Honorable Mr. Fool, I wish to communicate privately with the world. Here it comes. Klein nodded with anticipation as he isolated everyone's senses. Alger waited for 2 seconds before turning back to look at the world. Gehrman Sparrow. I will use an unknown primitive island's coordinates in exchange. On the island, there aren't only extinct Beyonder creatures that cannot be found on the northern and southern continent, but there's an ancient ruin of unknown age. Back then, it was discovered by Kalangos and me. Back then, we lacked the strength to delve deep inside it. However, he discovered certain traces, and he suspected that the ruins hide something extremely important. He believes that the value isn't lower than a card created by Emperor Roselle. My strength is inferior to Kalangos, and I didn't go as deep as he did. I had no idea what he saw, other than guesses about the situation from his remarks. What Mr. Hanged Man said holds plenty of information. From the looks of it, he long knew Vice Admiral Hurricane Kalangos. They had even adventured together and found the primitive island and ancient ruins. And previously, he was also the one who thought of finishing off this pirate admiral while he was away at sea. Mr. Hanged Man isn't an ordinary member of the Church of Storms. His past seems very complicated, and he hides many secrets. Yes, a primitive island's value isn't small. For a secret organization, this can be the foundation to support the growth of its members. Klein controlled the world to appear to be in thought as he attempted to obtain more information from the Hanged Man. With the world not rejecting or agreeing, Alger, who had calmed down, calmly said, On the island, there are traces of demigod-level Beyonder creatures. To you, that should be something valuable. On this point, I can swear on Mr. Fool's name. I guarantee that I'm not lying. After I obtain the Bizarro Sorcerer's Potion formula, I'll have to consider how to obtain the corresponding ingredients. At the level of a demigod, money becomes of little use. Trading gives me the highest chance of obtaining something I need. The location of demigod-level Beyonder creatures is important. That ruin is also quite interesting. The world didn't hesitate as he chuckled. Deal. Alger didn't immediately receive the Ocean Songster Potion formula. Instead, he said, I have a condition. I wish that on your first exploration of the primitive island, that you will do it with me. With Mr. Fool watching all of this, I believe you won't be concerned that I'll be up to no good. Klein considered it for a moment and made the world nod. No problem. I will need companions when heading to dangerous places. I hope that you will have the required strength. Alger wasn't angered by the world's tone as he heaved a sigh of relief. That's why I wish that your first exploration will be after I advance. Of course, if I were to lose control because of my potion, this agreement will naturally be null and void. No problem, the world replied without any qualms. Alger didn't harp on the topic. After obtaining Mr. Fool's agreement, he conjured the situation of the primitive island on a goatskin. It's along the periphery of the Rørsted Sea. It's quite a big island, almost the size of Blue Mountain Island. Klein received the goatskin and quickly scanned through it to gain a general understanding of the primitive island. He quickly looked up and said, "I'll hand over the potion formula and main ingredient after the gathering ends." All right. Having made his choice, Alger no longer had any reservations. When hearing that, he felt upheavals going through his heart, but he appeared even more staid on the surface. After the duo's private conversation came to an end, Katlia retracted her gaze at the world and looked at Furs. The meteorite crystal has been obtained. 600 pounds for 60 grams. That's fast. Ma'am Hermit is really efficient. Furs felt delighted, but she was also stumped. After last week's gathering, she had already obtained the crystallized blood of a Lavos squid. For that, she had paid 600 pounds, leaving her with 230 pounds. Adding the 150 pounds she received this week from her royalties, she was still short of 220 pounds. I'll first borrow from Zio. She should have that much. After I succeed in advancing, I'll try to earn money as quickly as possible. I have to. Furs silently drew a breath and said, "All right. We will do the transaction tomorrow at this time." The hermit tersely acknowledged and, without wasting any time, looked at Audrey. The black hunting giant lizard's spinal fluid has been confirmed. 1,800 pounds. There are temporarily no clues for the illusory chime tree's fruit. That's already very good. Better than I expected. Thank you, Ma'am Hermit. Audrey sincerely thanked her without even minding the price. She recently realized that there was a benefit to establishing the Relic Search and Preservation Foundation. She could use her funds in a more secretive and unnoticeable manner. It made it difficult for her parents to notice. After confirming the two transactions, Katlia surveyed the members as though she was one of them. Any clues to the blood of a mythical creature? Klein immediately controlled the world as he chuckled with a hoarse voice. Are you referring a pure mythical creature? Pure mythical creature? There are impure mythical creatures? Audrey and company were puzzled but interested by what they heard. Katlia was taken aback as she said, "A pure one, which means the blood of an angel. 1 drop is enough." She didn't introduce it in detail back then, because she believed that for the time being such a high-level object wouldn't appear in the Tarot Club unless Mr. Fool was willing to provide her with help. And clearly, Mr. Fool didn't need anyone to explain to him what a mythical creature was. I have certain clues, but I can't guarantee that I can obtain it. Furthermore, it might take another 3 months at least. Klein controlled the world to give the response. The other Tarot Club members fell silent. They never expected the world to have clues to an angel's blood. What can't he accomplish? Audrey, Furs, and company had their impression of Mr. World refreshed again. As for Alger, he suspected that the world would seek Mr. Fool's angel for a drop of blood. After a brief moment of silence, Emlyn, who suddenly realized that his advancement wasn't necessarily as obvious as the other members, weakly said, "Are there any clues regarding my previous commission?" Furs immediately said, "There are suspected cases. I will continue investigating." Burdened with debt, she was motivated to work. At the end of the trading segment, Derek mentioned his request of buying the crystallized roots of the Tree of Elders. As for the feathers of a spirit-packed bird, the City of Silver had it in their special warehouse. In addition, he also sought to purchase the Golden Edge sunflower and other supplementary ingredients. They were commonly seen items in the outside world, but they were lacking in the forsaken land of God. The crystallized roots of the Tree of Elders and the supplementary ingredients aren't difficult to obtain. Emlyn's attention was caught as he said, "Then, what can you use in exchange?" Back when he provided Miss Justice with the fruit of the Tree of Elders, he had already learned where the crystallized roots were. Derek thought and said, "A beyonder characteristic of a Sequence 5 vampire?" It was quite a commonly seen monster in the depths of the darkness. "Sanguine," Emlyn said through gritted teeth. "There's no rush. I'll tell you when I've decided what I need. He didn't want an item obtained from a transaction to overlap with the prize of the hunting competition. All right. Having already owed a debt to the world, Derek was relatively at ease. After a moment of silence, Klein rapped the edge of the mottled table to indicate the commencement of the free exchange. Chapter 717. The World and Hero Bandit. Inside the ancient palace standing above the gray fog, Alger wasn't in a rush to mention the matter regarding crazy Captain Connors Victor. He turned his head to look at the sun. Are you still in Afternoon Town? Derek nodded honestly. Yes, we took a very long time to establish a camp. Later, with small teams, we wiped out the remnant monsters, one street at a time, in search of any ancient ruins that might still exist. Although this process is slow, it's sufficiently safe. His answer was extremely detailed, and it gave the impression that Mr. Hanged Man could ask more questions if he wished to know more. Audrey listened with interest as she raised her hands slightly. With all of you staying in Afternoon Town for so long, what do you rely on for food? Is there any black-faced grass nearby? She had long heard from Little Sun that the city of Silver relied on the black-faced grass that they grew around the city as their source of sustenance. We carried a portion of powdered black-faced grass, but the main source of food comes from hunting those monsters. Once the Beyonder characteristic is expelled, a large proportion of them can be eaten once we skin them and roast them with fire. However, there's a certain degree of corruption in the meat, which will result in psychological problems. We can't continuously consume the meat, and we will need to spread out the intervals. Derek replied in a serious manner to Miss Justice's question. Audrey recalled the few monsters in the depths of the darkness mentioned by Little Sun, and having terrifying vibes about the dark and eerie area around the city of Silver, she couldn't help but press further. Wouldn't that be very disgusting? Furs, who was attentively listening to the other members' conversation, was inspired by this question. She deliberately didn't look at Emlyn as she asked Derek with piqued curiosity, I remember you mentioning that monsters in the depths of the darkness include vampires. Their bodies run with pus and are extremely ugly. Then, how would you consume vampires after killing them? Emlyn, who heard the question, forgot to correct her by informing her that sanguine weren't vampires. His expression turned livid as he felt an inexplicable feeling of indescribable horror. Derek was silent for 2 seconds before saying, there are some monsters that are indeed disgusting, very disgusting. Just like the vampires as mentioned by Miss Magician, but we have no choice. As long as it's edible, we will eat it. His voice gradually turned heavy, as though he once again deeply felt the tragedy that was the curse which enveloped the city of Silver. The palace that looked like a giant's residence fell silent once again. Even Emlyn, who wanted to retort Derek, didn't say a word. All he did was curl his lips and retract his arm. A few seconds later, the world broke the silence with a chuckle. Let's return to the sea. There have been certain matters that require your attention. Crazy Captain Connors Victor's single-eyed skull drifted to a nearby harbor after a storm. The masts were snapped, and there were charred marks. The entire crew, including Connors Victor, died. No one survived. Justice and company didn't know who Crazy Captain was. They weren't too interested in the news, other than being curious as to what caused this destructive naval tragedy. On the other hand, Alger shared completely different thoughts from them. There must be a tremendous secret if the world is paying attention to the matter regarding Crazy Captain. It's no wonder His Eminence Cotman issued such an important command to get the mandated Punisher and captains to investigate the situation. Alger's eyes darted about slightly as he said after some thought, in Byam, the Church of Storms is actively investigating the people and matters surrounding Crazy Captain Connors Victor. There's no need for me to commission it. Klein chuckled inwardly and got the world to directly ask, what clues does the Church of Storms possess? I have no idea. I'll try my best to understand the situation. Alger frankly shook his head. He believed that the world understood what he was implying, that he wasn't exactly sure, but he would sound out what the church knew. Audrey, who was listening out of curiosity, realized that the matter regarding Crazy Captain wasn't simple. Hence, she asked probingly, Mr. World, isn't this common infighting among pirates? Klein was just about to be perfunctory with Miss Justice but without divulging anything further when he suddenly thought of a problem. Behind the great smog of Backlund and the disappearances, there might be a particular faction from the royal family. It also included some military personnel. And Miss Justice would lean towards the nobles and royal family, both her emotions and from her standpoint. If there comes a day when I target those bastards who are deserving of death, she might not find it acceptable if I commission a mission to her. She might even fall into a dilemma. Therefore, I should now inject the impression in her that the royal family and military have plenty of bad guys. I would subtly change the direction in which her standpoint and emotions are directed towards. For this, I can bear the burden that some of the information regarding the world is leaked. Klein thought for a moment and made the world say with a relaxed, but mocking tone, "Crazy Captain is related to the disappearance of the colonial slaves which Mr. Hanged Man was previously investigating. The Demonist sect takes the people who are tricked or abducted and hands them over to Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy, and they have them ship the people over to the northern continent's East Seas coast. Then, with Crazy Captain Connors Victor, it completes the last mile. This pirate is intricately tied with many human traffickers and slave merchants in loan. Back when I informed Mr. Hanged Man of the news in January, someone witnessed Balin, who was involved in the disappearance cases, with a MI9 member who is loyal to the royal family. Also, Backlund's largest human trafficker, Capim, had guards from the Arbiter pathway. With so many matters compounded together, do you think that Crazy Captain's death is simply a result of pirate infighting? Heh, I've always wondered why the person behind all of this needs so many slaves. The connections between the clues were clearly presented before Audrey, Alger, and company. It made them suddenly realize a lot of things. Mr. World left Backlund and headed for the sea to seek out clues. He's always been investigating the truth behind the Great Smog and Prince Edisac's death. According to the information he provided, it's clear that the true murderer hasn't been punished. He's still hidden inside the royal family, and there's a portion of the military who are working for him. How despicable! This kind of person should be thrown into hell. How does Mr. World know that the guards around Capim were Beyonders from the Arbiter pathway? Did he fight with them? Audrey's mind raced as she suddenly made the connection. Capim was killed by hero bandit Black Emperor. The latter clearly knew which pathway Capim's guards belonged to. Hero bandit Black Emperor is Mr. Fool's blessed. Mr. World is suspected to have certain connections with Mr. Fool. He has never sought Emperor Roselle's diary pages. Therefore, Mr. World is Hero Bandit Black Emperor, and he's also Mr. Fool's blessed? He doesn't hand in Emperor Roselle's diary pages because he hands them over in private? Some of his actions from before were to hide his identity as a blessed? This is a test given to him by Mr. Fool? It's really hard to connect Mr. World with Hero Bandit Black Emperor. The latter feels like a hero. Audrey felt like she had stumbled upon the truth as she began to wonder what kind of person Mr. World, who was also Hero Bandit Black Emperor, was actually like in real life. Alger and Katlia instantly understood why Gehrman Sparrow had attacked Tracy. This blessed was seeking out the truth behind the Great Smog of Backlund. And the truth hidden behind this was something Mr. Fool was interested in. Furs and Emlyn, who lived in Backlund, also vaguely sensed something when the world mentioned Capim. After all, Hero Bandit Black Emperor's legend was rather striking in the recent half a year. He became an important character in many run-of-the-mill novels. Even Furs herself had thought of making him the protagonist in a love story between a hero bandit and a young royal lady. They finally understood why the world had noticed in time that something was brewing in Backlund and that a tragedy was about to happen. This was because this gentleman had been tracking the corresponding clues the entire time. From the looks of it, the matter in Backlund is far from over. There will likely be another accident in the future. I really wish to flee from this place immediately, but Zio definitely wouldn't want to. I have no way of explaining this to her. Furs suddenly had thoughts of fleeing Backlund. Emlyn wasn't too afraid. From his point of view, the Sanguine's important figures were in Backlund and were definitely able to provide some protection if a disaster really happened. After 2 seconds of silence, Alger said in a serious manner, I will try my best to investigate this matter. He had already sensed that the truth behind Crazy Captain's death hid a rather terrifying storm. As such, he was a little apprehensive and afraid, but he also trembled with excitement that he was involved in the most important matter regarding the southern and northern continents. After Katlia heard that, she nodded. I will also seek out relevant information. If there are more clues provided, perhaps I might be able to help. Klein thought for a moment before letting the world speak frankly. On the night of Crazy Captain's death, a high-sequence beyonder suspected to be from the Black Emperor pathway appeared on his ship. However, this demigod managed to escape before John Cotman arrived. Black Emperor pathway, demigod? Alger and Katlia ruminated over these phrases as they considered an angle of attack. Audrey and company were astonished that the Tarot Club had discussed the development of demigods to something directly involving demigods. The cases that they were involved in were really increasing in level. As for Derek, he didn't understand a thing. With Crazy Captain's matter coming to pass, Katlia glanced at the world before deliberately mentioning her tidbit. Another incident happened at sea. Last week, the crazy adventurer Gehrman Sparrow hunted the second mate of the King of Immortality, Slaughterer Curtius. He was a Sequence 5 Beyonder. How impressive! Furs, who was only a Sequence 8, sighed from the bottom of her heart. She knew very well what it meant to be a Sequence 5. Yes, he really is a legendary adventurer, Audrey echoed. Emlyn turned agape before he closed his mouth. He felt that he was still a distance away from that level. Alger said without any signs of unrest, it's because of this that the investigation of Gehrman Sparrow's origins has become an important mission of the various major organizations. Are you implying that the Church of Storms has gotten you to investigate me? Klein instantly read in between the lines as he made the world chuckle. I wonder where I can claim this commission? I wish to use some unimportant information in exchange for money. I have some understanding of Gehrman Sparrow. Oh, Mr. World is hinting that he doesn't mind me exchanging what appears to be important but, in reality, is actually meaningless information regarding Gehrman Sparrow in exchange for rewards and trust. The hanged man nodded in enlightenment. The free exchange continued for a while until Derek finished learning this week's list of ancient Hermes terms before everything came to a close. After he watched the bowing Miss Justice and company leave, Klein cast his gaze onto Grozel's travels. Chapter 718. Characters in the book. Not finding himself overly exhausted, Klein rubbed his temples and beckoned over a tiny metallic bottle from the junk pile. Inside it was a tiny tube of blood that he went through great effort to extract from his vein, and he had long brought it above the gray fog. It was only waiting for the opportunity when Klein would use his spirit body to enter Grozel's travels to explore the book world. After opening the cap, Klein wasn't in a hurry to smear the blood over the book's dark brown cover. Instead, he summoned all the items from the junk pile that he had brought to the mysterious space before the tarot gathering, and he spread them out in front of him. In consideration of how the Black Emperor's form was too eye-catching, and with him not too certain of the exact situation in the book world, Klein decided against bringing the card of blasphemy. Instead, he used Azek's copper whistle to fortify his spirit body to prevent himself from failing to return above the gray fog before being instantly killed by some unknown power. As the ancient and exquisite copper whistle fused into his body, Klein's spirit body swelled up and became more corporeal. Two pitch-black flames flared out from his eye sockets as though they possessed a life of their own. With the help of cogitation, he adjusted his spirituality, converging the iciness that stemmed from the aspect of death within his body. Soon his eyes returned to normal. This was like an evil spirit taking on an ordinary form to lure prey into its proximity. Right on the heels of that, Klein wore creeping hunger and held death knell while he hid the nightmare beyonder characteristic in his body. The latter was prepared for him to seek out any abnormalities when exploring the dreams of the living entities in the book world. After completing all his preparations, he poured a few drops of blood and smeared it over the cover of Grozel's travels. After a brief wait, his vision turned blurry, as though countless translucent objects were hidden within it. Following that, it turned clear. There were blue skies, white clouds, grayish-brown city walls, and passers-by. This is no longer the land of ice and snow from before, but a city that looks very normal on the surface. Klein stood by the side of the dirt road as he observed the residents of the book world. He discovered that most of them wore linen shirts, a short brown coat, and loose dark-colored trousers. Their overall style was akin to that of the Lone Kingdom centuries ago. He looked down at the format of the tailcoat, starched shirt, and damaged dark red bow tie as he silently changed it all out. Instantly, he was no different from the people around him. He then walked to the city gates in preparation to enter. At that moment, a leather-vested soldier at the gate stopped him. Entrance fees. One little. Do I look rich? I don't even know what a little is. Klein mumbled inwardly, amused. He then communicated with him at a spiritual level, successfully transferring the soldier's attention onto a merchant caravan behind him. As a quasi-wraith who could possess anyone and control them, exerting a psychological influence on others was nothing extraordinary. It wasn't a particularly potent ability, but it was extremely useful against ordinary people. When Klein entered the city, he walked through the streets in a seemingly relaxed manner, but he inwardly remained wary. He felt that public hygiene was slightly better than Backlund a few years ago. It appeared to have a mature sewage system, preventing the situation of any waste and trash being dumped. I couldn't tell that this is an illusory world inside a book at all. Everyone has spirit-body threads. Klein proceeded forward as he observed. Suddenly, he noticed a stone building that was more than 10 meters tall to his side. It only had 2 stories, and the top of the door was about 4 meters tall. Beside the building was a signboard. It was written in a language that was completely different from any of the outside world's languages, but Klein instantly understood what it meant. Pesot Blacksmith Guild. There's a blacksmith guild. This place really hasn't entered the age of steam. Just as Klein was feeling poignant, he saw the door creak open, and out walked a giant with 4 long limbs. The giant's skin was grayish-blue, and his head had the trademark single vertical eye. In his hand was a huge and heavy sledgehammer. He walked across the street with his lips curled. The humans walking past him didn't show any fear, as though it was a common sight. They even greeted the giant. "Good afternoon, Grozel." Grozel? Klein, who was rather face-blind to giants, had his pupils constrict. Only then did he realize the familiarity. He was just about to chase after them when he discovered that the giant had turned into another street, vanishing from his sights. Klein stood on the spot, silently observing the intersection as he came up with a few guesses. There's another Grozel in the book world? No, the ending of the travels is that Grozel died in battle in the Nation of Frost. This is another story? Filled with all kinds of questions, Klein wasn't in a rush to find Grozel. He turned and entered a bar by the side of the street. Such places were often the places with the most messy and multifarious information in a city. It aided him in quickly gaining a grasp of the entire situation. The bar's lighting was dim, and the ventilation wasn't the best, making the air appear somewhat turbid. At that moment, there weren't many customers drinking. Most of the people were by the bar counter, chatting happily with each other or the bartender. Klein slowly walked over when his gaze froze. He saw a man wearing a black pointed hat and an asymmetrical coat by the side of the bar counter. He looked pretty handsome with his flaxen-colored hair, deep brown eyes, a high nose, and thin lips. He was none other than the Solomon Empire Viscount, Mobit Zerost. Upon seeing him, Klein recalled the scene of the Dream Stealer's rapid aging before he collapsed onto the ground as he struggled to crawl towards elvish songster Ciadas and grabbed her hand. All of that remained clear as day, as though it had just happened yesterday. Yet, Mobit had once again appeared before his eyes. Klein's expression grew heavy as he walked over and sat beside Mobit. He didn't say a word, as he knew that Mobit was one to start a conversation. "Outsider, first time in Pesot? I swear I've never met you before." Mobit put down a cup of distilled liquor as he turned his head to the side. "I come from the Nation of Frost." Klein randomly cooked up a story. Mobit immediately laughed loudly. "You're a funny one. This is the Nation of Frost, but of course, that was many years ago. Ever since the King of the North was killed by a bunch of adventurers, no, heroes, this place is no longer plagued by ice and snow. Everyone believes that it should be called the nation of Neverwinter. Klein fell silent without responding. Why so serious? It looks like you have your own troubles. Mobit rapped on the wooden bar counter, showing signs of sympathy. He downed a mouthful of spirits and said, I'm telling you, men should absolutely not get married. It's the beginning of suffering. Do you know? When she gets worked up a little, she would beat me up. When she's happy, she beats me up. Same when she's embarrassed or angry. Anyway, she beats me up for any reason. From this very moment, I've decided not to return home again. Does this mean you got married to Ciatis? Klein kept silent for 2 seconds as he sized up Mobit's face. He discovered that there were no signs of bruises and swelling on his face. This meant that the elvish songster knew that men needed to put on appearances. He asked with a sigh, Then why did you marry her? Mobit was taken aback as he smiled wryly. I came here with a merchant caravan. When I first saw her, she was just that beautiful. Her singing was moving and seemed to hide indescribable sorrow. Heh, I'm as afraid of her now as I was infatuated over her back then. I definitely won't return. Hey, why do you seem a little sad? You don't have to be sad for me. I'm already free. At that moment, the door to the bar suddenly opened as a beautiful female voice shouted, Mobit, come out here. I'm counting from 10. Never come back if you don't come home. 10, 9. Mobit immediately jumped up and ran to the door. As he ran, he muttered, I know you don't have any patience. You always jump to 2 after counting to 8. Klein turned his body and saw Ciatis's figure, but he no longer had the intention of communicating with her. The real Mobit and Ciatis were already dead. The ones living in the book world were just 2 characters. Standing up and leaving the bar, Klein came to a nearby deserted alley. He planned on confirming the kind of spirit world this world had. He quickly outlined spherical lights in his mind as his thoughts gradually emptied out and his body and mind became tranquil. As his spirituality spread out bit by bit, several indescribable illusory figures appeared around him. However, up high in the sky, it lacked the 7 lustrous brilliances of different colors that contained endless knowledge. The 7 lights don't exist here. The number of spirit world creatures here are lacking. This place is indeed a fake spirit world created by the book. Klein took a step forward and found the colors in his visions saturate to the extreme as it overlapped with the obvious differences. He wasn't in a rush to explore the spirit world. He exited it and began window shopping through Pesot and chatted with others. Before long, he found Grozel's residence. The giant ran a blacksmith shop. He was taking an afternoon nap on a huge bed on the 2nd story. Klein directly entered by passing through the wall and came to Grozel's side. He observed the giant for a few seconds and took out the Nightmare Beyonder characteristic from his spirit body. With some difficulty, he used some of its powers that it came naturally equipped with. Deep, serene darkness quickly spread as it instantly enveloped Klein and Grozel. And in a spirit body state, Klein directly saw a blob of irregular hazy spherical light. His spirituality immediately emanated over and touched the spherical light. All sorts of scattered scenes instantly flashed past around him before fixating on a forest with towering but withered trees. On the other side of the forest was a mountain and steep cliffs. At the top of it was a magnificent palace. The palace was huge and opulent, and it didn't seem suitable for humans. It gave him the impression like it was from a myth as the light of dusk that scattered above it seemed frozen. Klein had seen this palace before. It was the giant king's court that had appeared in the dream world of the battlefield of the gods. However, this angle was completely different from before. He was situated behind the king's court. Chapter 719. Dream Tour. Klein turned his gaze to the forest where light could hardly penetrate through its denseness, having gained a rough idea of where he was. This was the waning forest which Grozel guarded when he was at the giant king's court. The trees in the forest were tens of meters tall, and the thickness of the trees was the arm span of several giants. However, their barks were mottled with signs of rot everywhere. The leaves and twigs were mostly withered and dropping as they interwove with each other like a dark cloud floating in midair. Grozel and similar-looking giants guarded the boundary of the forest, either carrying axes or broadswords, fully concentrating on defending the area. According to Grozel, this waning forest has the bodies of giant King Ormr's father and mother buried in it. Apart from this ancient god, no one else is allowed to step inside, including these guards. Yes, giant King Ormr's parents should be so-called original giants, the kind that was the craziest, cruelest, and most ferocious. Perhaps, why would Grozel have such a dream? As Klein was in thought, he suddenly sensed something amiss. According to his random conversations in Pesot, the present Grozel was a native giant who had nothing to do with the giant king's court. Therefore, having such a dream made it appear rather abnormal. From the psychology alchemist theory which Ma'am Daly and Miss Justice have discussed before, perhaps the book world will use or clone the original character's subconscious or collective subconscious when creating a character. Then, it would make minor changes, making the consciousness fulfill the required settings. Therefore, Grozel's dream will be influenced by his subconscious, reproducing life in the giant king's court. If that's the case, it can only be said that this book is a cruel author. The moment Klein thought of this, he suddenly had an idea. He felt that this was an opportunity for him to gather relevant information on the giant king's court. He previously planned on directly learning about such matters through Grozel. But in order to keep his promise, the giant guardian had died in the battle with King of the North Ulyssen. After his spirit body left the book world, it quickly dissipated without giving him any chance of communicating. Now, he finally had another method, which was to explore Grozel's dream. There had to be parts of it that were ridiculous or exaggerated, but the remaining content had to be a true reflection of reality. As long as an approach of careful study is employed, it's not impossible to distinguish the two. Grozel never entered the waning forest, so the scenes inside must stem from his imagination. There's no need to explore it. Klein slowly cast his gaze onto the mountain where the king's court was. It wasn't tall, which meant that the waning forest was on a mountain rather close to the king's court. It was probably just a straight path from there to the ancient god's residence. Klein didn't waste time searching as he walked straight to Grozel and acted like he knew him well. He asked in a relaxed tone, "How should I return to the king's court?" He knew that Grozel was an honest giant, and he would only be more honest in his dream. Grozel raised his hand to scratch the back of his head as he looked down with a confused look. He said with a smile, "Isn't it simply by taking the barren tunnel?" He pointed ahead and added, "You'll see it when you circle around that boulder." "Thank you," Klein sighed as he said with a bow. As he watched Klein depart, Grozel scratched the back of his head again, muttering to himself in confusion, "Who is he? Why do I find him so familiar?" After circling a boulder that protruded out the mountain, the scene opened up before Klein's eyes. A gigantic cave at least 30 meters tall appeared. Erected outside the cave was a stone stele. Engraved on it was a single vertical eye, a high nose, and plush lips. It looked like a giant's head had been squeezed in to reveal the frontal facial features. Just as Klein approached, the mouth on the stele opened. "Why are you returning to the king's court ahead of time?" "By His Majesty's orders," Klein said in an unflustered tone. After all, the intelligence level of all the living beings in this dream was equivalent to the owner of the dream, Grozel. The lips on the stele opened and closed as it let out a humming sound. "Please answer a question. Otherwise, you shall not pass. If only I brought along a Rhodes, it should be rather fun to see what happens." Klein lampooned as he calmly nodded. "Okay." The stele's lips closed for 3 seconds before opening. "If your wife, daughter, and a woman you covet ask you to judge which of them is most beautiful, who would you choose?" This is completely different from the magic mirror style. Klein's lips quivered as his mind raced. Using nearly 10 seconds, he answered, "My intelligence is insufficient to determine this matter. I will assign someone who is more intelligent than me to give the answer." "How can I answer something that can get me killed?" He gritted his teeth as he added, "Who is this more intelligent person?" The giant's face on the stele froze for a few seconds. Klein solemnly answered, "Of course it's our king." The stele was shocked beyond words. It took quite a moment before it said, "All right, I'll consider it as you answering the question." "You may pass." Klein immediately crossed the strange stele and walked into the cave. The ground in the cave was paved with large stone panels that had been weathered. The sides and top of the cave were filled with murals, speaking of stories of the giants and dragons battling the demonic wolves, mutants, devils, and phoenixes. The drawing style was crude and the color choice was dark. However, it was extremely vivid. Klein walked forward as he observed the murals. He discovered that there were swaths of withered weeds, as well as all kinds of coarse gravel in between the stone panels and the bottom of the murals. And the lack of water and the decline of life became more apparent the deeper he ventured inside. After walking for an unknown period of time, Klein saw a huge grayish-blue open door. Standing on each side of the door was a 4 to 5 meter tall giant. The giants guarding this place were different from Grozel and the others. They wore solid and beautiful iron-black armor and firm, exquisite helms. They looked like two huge statues. They didn't stop Klein and allowed him to pass through the door and enter the hall within. The hall wasn't too spacious. The ends of the hall could be seen clearly, and it could probably only hold 5 to 6 giants. As Klein was observing his environment, he suddenly halted. Then, the hall seemed to be pulled up by an invisible hand as it quickly rose. He staggered a little before finding his footing. All he saw were grayish-black walls flashing by as they kept sweeping downwards. In about 10 seconds, there was a thud as the hall stopped ascending. At this moment, it wasn't the cave tunnel outside the door, but a magnificent palace propped up by stone columns. Klein briskly left the original hall as he sized up his surroundings with piqued interest. This is the Giant King's Court's elevator. This seems to be the place where the guards live. Outside is a long table taller than humans with extremely large chairs. On the two sides are rooms, and inside them are neatly ordered beds. Klein swept past the various items in the hall before he stopped at a mural. The mural's main character was a giant dressed in full-body silver armor. As there was nothing to scale, Klein was unable to know exactly how tall he was. The giant stood by the side of a cliff, with a sword in hand pointing diagonally upwards. His body emitted a bright halo, like a rising sun illuminating the surroundings. Many giants were genuflecting around him, as though praying or worshipping him and awaiting a bestowment. The Giant King's son, god of dawn, Badheilbrunn? Klein looked at the face of the mural's main character in thought, and he saw that his face was blocked by a mask. There was only a dawn-like halo coming from his eyes. It's very similar to the god of combat statue in the Backlund underground ruins. His face is completely hidden behind a mask. Queen Mystic said before that the god of combat is a giant who lived from ancient times. Therefore, their church's headquarters, the Great Twilight Hall, resembled the Giant King's court. Could it be the son of the Giant King? God of Dawn escaped the destruction of the king's court, and at a certain point in time, he managed to retake the authority wielded by his father? Klein made a bold guess, but he lacked any evidence or clues. He used the correspondence principle to look at the wall opposite the mural. There was also a mural there, but the main character was no longer God of Dawn, Badheilbrunn. Instead, it was a female giant in a leather vest and long skirt. This female giant stood sideways. Her facial contours were soft, and her single vertical eye was focused beneath her. Long, dark brown hair reached all the way to her back. Her right hand was spread out as she held items like wheat and fruits. Around her were golden fields, clear lakes, and trees covered with fruits and colorful mushrooms. Giant Queen, Goddess of Harvest, Olmabella? Klein looked around, but he didn't see the mural representing Giant King Ormer. There's no depiction of the ancient god because this is the residence of remote guards? Then, going out from here will likely be the interior of the Giant King's court? Klein carefully walked to the door. He used the method he employed in the dream world of the battlefield ruins of the gods by activating creeping hunger and using the strength of a zombie to open the door. However, there wasn't a palace in the frozen dusk that he had imagined outside. Instead, it was a gray, hazy world. It appeared to be a cliff with a bottomless pit. According to Miss Justice's previous experience, this is likely the boundary of the dream. The only way is to head down and enter Grozel's subconscious. Finally, I'll arrive at the sea of collective subconscious. Miss Justice discovered a mind dragon in the human sea of collective subconscious where she was. Then, in this book world created by the dragon of imagination, what would be contained in the sea of collective subconscious? Klein's mind whirred as he conjured a staircase that led down into the hazy world. The staircase didn't head straight down but spiraled around deep into the gray haze. The bottom couldn't be seen, nor were any of the details of the mind world that were possible to discern. Chapter 720, Philosopher. After silently observing it for a few seconds, Klein walked forward as he got onto the staircase and carefully walked down it. The surrounding light gradually dimmed with a gray, hazy luster that enveloped the extremely silent world. The moment Klein proceeded down the staircase, he felt more and more like he was being locked inside a dark, silent room. Slowly, his ears could hear his sloshing blood and his beating heart. The latter sped up as it was invaded by panic and horror which he could hardly keep in check. Klein focused his mind as he imagined the stacks of spherical light so as to stabilize his emotions and recover. To his side, a grayish-white cliff coldly stood there, a representation of the domain of Grozel's consciousness. It was silent as though it were dead, but the surrounding grayness would occasionally coruscate. Klein focused his gaze and saw that in one of the points of light, there was a giant who ripped apart a human before stuffing it into his mouth, as well as Grozel panicking. Back then, the latter was less than 3 meters tall, and it was clearly still an adolescent. The point of light flashed past, appearing in the frozen dusk that scattered over the mountain peak. Time here seemed to become impeded. Klein was just about to seek out any valuable information in Grozel's subconscious when he suddenly heard sounds akin to a beast's panting. With a whoosh, a huge palm appeared from the surrounding haze. Its skin was grayish-blue and was covered with signs of rot. On it was an obvious yellowish-green liquid as it quickly grabbed at Klein's ankle. Amidst the panting sound, similar palms rose up one after another from the staircase below, as though they were attempting to forcibly pull Klein's spirit body into the mind world's darkest and most unfathomable zone. Instantly, these rotting palms formed a dense horse as they kept struggling upwards and let out sounds of horrible, hair-raising panting. It made Klein instinctively jump up 3 steps. However, the countless palms that belonged to giant corpses didn't stop. They squirmed along the staircase as they surged upwards, covering every inch of space. Klein was just about to reach out his right palm to draw Death Knell and use purifying bullets combined together with Death Knell's slaughter ability to finish off the countless monsters when 2 questions suddenly flashed in his mind. Where do these palms come from? Why would they be inside Grozel's subconscious? The moment this thought came to mind, his spiritual perception was triggered. Klein came to a realization as he immediately abandoned his thoughts of using Death Knell. He calmed his breathing and imagined the spherical lights. The huge, rotting palms took this opportunity to reach his feet as they grabbed his calves and ankles. At that moment, they silent vanished as though they had never appeared. Indeed, this is an illusion created by Grozel's subconscious. Here, minds don't just face each other, but they interact with them as well. If one lacks the corresponding beyonder powers, the deeper one goes, the easier it is to have an emotional breakdown. Intrusion by the other party's subconscious will slowly happen until one's beyonder powers are severely tainted. As a result, one will become a mental patient that will never be able to recover their rationality, and this might very well lead to a loss of control. This is different from communicating with spirits. Corruption isn't avoided simply by maintaining lucidity and reason. This is because one is already inside the target's beyonder powers. Klein muttered to himself, having figured out something. He hesitated for a few seconds before turning around to climb back up the stairs. He gave up on venturing deep into Grozel's mind world because he lacked the beyonder powers to placate his own mind. Insisting on heading down was equivalent to suicide. I'll consider exploring again after I find a mystical item that targets this aspect. Klein determined his thoughts as he walked faster. Finally, with a leap, he returned to Grozel's dreamscape and returned to the guard's quarters in the giant king's court. He already felt exhausted, So he immediately left the dream, walking out of Grozel's blacksmith through the walls before observing the wonders of the book world. I've already met Grozel, Mobit, and Ciatus. And while I was casually chatting with others, I also heard of the devout priest, Snowman, and the philosopher, Frunzier. However, there isn't an Anderson Hood, Edwina Edwards, Danitz, or Gehrman Sparrow. Therefore, only the dead will possess brand new characters in the book. Or could it be that only those who had stayed in here for extended periods of time, fully expressing themselves as an adventurer in their day-to-day lives, would be able to have their subconscious replicated? As Klein strolled by the side of the street which was illuminated by the setting sun, he considered something that he found crucial. If it were the former theory, where the dead would revive and become new characters, then there was nothing Klein needed to worry about. However, if it was the latter, he had to consider reducing the frequency at which he explored the book, as well as strictly control the amount of time he spent in it each time. There's no way to ascertain it for now. I'll deal with the situation by assuming it's the latter. There's definitely nothing wrong with being cautious. Klein quickly made up his mind and was about to return above the gray fog. At that moment he saw another familiar figure. Frunzier, with his black hair and blue eyes, was sitting on a long wooden chair by the street. He was staring blankly at the sky which seemed to be alit in flames, as though he was in thought. Recalling how this lone soldier's ash urn was still with him, he planned on sending it back to the Church of Storms cemetery in Backland. Klein silently sighed and walked over before sitting beside him. He asked as though it was a casual conversation, "What's on your mind?" "I'm wondering who I am, where I come from, how I should return." Frunzier didn't look away as he said in a dreamlike state. Without waiting for Klein to ask another question, he shook his head with a chuckle. "I ultimately feel that I don't belong here. I'm not myself at the moment, and that there's some place awaiting my return. They always mock me for considering such pointless questions, so they gave me the title of philosopher." As he spoke, he looked at the setting sun and once again fell into silence and looked spellbound. Klein didn't say a word. He sat there quietly and accompanied Frunzier in watching the sunset. Finally, he silently vanished. Frunzier didn't notice that the person beside him had already left. He sat there motionless like a marble statue, looking far into the distance. After replenishing the ship's supplies, Alger Wilson instructed the Blue Avenger to leave the Resistance's private harbor. It wasn't going to stay too long in the Rorsted archipelago. He had to return to Pasu Island to make his report by the designated time. At that moment, in the captain's cabin, he was watching in anticipation at the illusory door that was formed by items with spirituality and a burgeoning flame. It was the door of sacrifice, and it was also a door of bestowment. Amidst an illusory creaking sound, the mysterious door slowly opened, revealing an infinite depth and darkness within its interior. Light shot out from within before converging immediately. After everything calmed down, 2 items had appeared on the altar at some point in time. As for the door with all kinds of strange symbols, it was gone. Alger was able to compose himself as he seriously thanked Mr. Fool. He finished the ritual according to the procedure before reaching out to pick up the 2 items. One of them was a piece of paper that had been neatly folded, while the other was a translucent jellyfish that had azure blue seawater in it. Alger inspected the latter and discovered that there were occasional vortexes formed by winds or occasional lightning streaks. And from time to time, he could hear a distant, moving voice sounding from it. This voice sounds like a woman's. From the looks of it, this characteristic's owner was a lady. Alger couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. This meant that it wasn't some quasi-high-ranking member of the Church of Storms that had been killed. The Church of Storms didn't have any female high-ranking members, quasi or not. Putting away the ocean songster's beyonder characteristic, Alger unfolded the piece of paper. He swept past the main ingredient, and he quickly looked at the supplementary ingredients. Finally, his eyes paused at the ritual. To him, the main ingredients were unimportant with a beyonder characteristic in hand. He could look at it later. As for supplementary ingredients, they were rather easy to find, so they didn't need much attention. It was the ritual that was of utmost importance. Drink the potion in an Obninsk's belly. Alger silently read the ritual's contents as the corresponding information quickly surfaced in his mind. Obninsks were ancient sea monsters. They could directly devour a sailboat, and it had a humongous, distorted body. It had as many as 3 heads and many tentacles that entangled with each other. They were the protagonists in many legends at sea. Most of these sea monsters were tamed by the Church of Storms. They had a fixed region of activity, but it was unknown if they had near-human intelligence. It's no wonder the Church controls Obninsks, and not other sea monsters. It's no wonder there are so many Beyonders in the sailor pathway among pirates, but only a few can reach Sequence 5. Either they directly inherited it, or they're the subordinates of King of the Five Seas or Queen Mystic. Then, where should I find Obninsks that don't belong to the Church? Alger frowned slightly as he contemplated his advancement that bypassed the Church of Storms. His first reaction was to find Queen Mystic Bernadette through Admiral of Stars Catlia. From her, he could find Obninsks that didn't belong to the Church of Storms. His second reaction was that it exposed himself to danger. This was because the corresponding Obninsks were likely servants of Queen Mystic, and they would report everything to their mistress. Yes, this will be the last resort if there aren't any other choices. Alger's thoughts raced as he quickly had another idea. That was to pray to Mr. Fool. This reawakened existence secretly wielded the former authority of sea god Calvetua. He could commandeer undersea creatures, allowing him to know where to find Obninsks that didn't belong to any faction. There's no need to rush it. If I were to advance now, I won't be able to hide the advancement from others because of my lack of control over the spirituality dissipation. I can perform the prayer after I make my report and leave Pasu Island. Alger calmed down and memorized the ocean songster formula. Then, he moved the piece of paper to the tip of the candle's flame. As he watched the flame devour the formula at an increasing speed, Alger's gaze turned deep. After finishing off the remnant traces, his gaze landed on a sea map and locked onto a location. Bansi. Alger had planned on making a trip to Bansi in passing while en route to Pasu Island. He wanted to know what the present state of the harbor was. He had already shared his thoughts with his sailors, and no one objected. This was because they were equally curious as to why Bansi Harbor was suddenly destroyed. They were curious what it had turned into. Chapter 721. Klein's Guidance on the Future. Frank Lee rolled up his sleeves and began flicking his fountain pen while writing with a smile. My dear friend, Gehrman Sparrow, I have good news for you. I have successfully cultivated a new breed of mushrooms by using the flesh and blood of a rose bishop. As long as there's fish, it will keep growing. We'll no longer have to worry about not being able to eat mushrooms due to long voyages. Furthermore, it has been crossbred with beef, making it taste excellent. Its only flaw is that there's no way to make it catch fish by itself. External help is needed, but I don't think it's too big a problem. After all, based on what Nina said, it wouldn't corrupt the ocean. Well, let's just pretend she's right. I've mailed you some dried mushrooms. As long as you give it water and fish, they will immediately become normal and reproduce by themselves. I hope you will like my gift. After going on and on, Frank finally folded the letter and placed it in an envelope. He stuffed 3 dried mushrooms into it before applying glue and sealing it. After doing all of this, he took out the note Klein had given him, followed the description written, and began to seriously prepare the ritual needed to summon the messenger. This wasn't complicated for Frank, so it didn't take long for him to set up the altar and create a wall of spirituality. Finally, he solemnly placed a lone gold coin before the candle. He lit the candle, softly chanted the incantation, and stared at the flame. He watched it burgeon as a headless woman walked out with 4 heads in hand. Frank first jumped in fright before staring at Rionette Tinker's 4 beautiful blonde, red-eyed heads that looked identical with patience as he muttered, "How was it done? Why are they completely identical? If planted in soil, will more be grown?" The eyes of the 4 heads held by Rionette Tinker turned in different directions before uniformly falling on Frank Lee's face. Suddenly, the soil stored inside all kinds of vessels within the room flew out and piled before Frank. Following that, Frank floated up as he tumbled in midair with a shocked expression. He was thrown straight into the pile of soil with his head first. His legs kept struggling as they dangled outside, but he was unable to pull himself out of the soil pile anytime soon. Only then did two of Rionette Tinker's four heads reach out forward, separately biting down on the letter and the gold coin. Only after she completely disappeared did Frank Lee finally find the best spot to exert his strength to escape the soil as he fell to the ground. She's powerful. Frank first sighed with a sense of lingering fear. Following that, he wiped the soil beside his mouth, bit into it, and chewed on it carefully before muttering to himself, "It's a bit sour." At that moment, Katlia, who had just finished a sacrifice in her cabin, sensed something. Her dark purple eyes subconsciously looked towards Frank Lee's room, and she vaguely saw a crudely made illusory doll. The doll didn't have a head. The scene flashed as Katlia closed her eyes immediately. She felt her eyes were burning as she couldn't help but have her tears flow out. She knitted brows little by little as she muttered in disbelief, "Ancient Bane?" After sending the meteorite crystal and black hunting giant lizard's spinal fluid to Miss Magician and Miss Justice, Klein returned to the real world. He lay himself down on a reclining chair as he allowed his body to rock gently. He began considering where he would head to next. With news of Gairman Sparrow's sighting and crazy Captain Connor's Victor's matter, it's unlikely that the pirates will openly appear in Byam for some time. They've either left the harbors or are hiding themselves, making it difficult for others to find them. That is to say that there's no need for me to stay here. The matters regarding the resistance can be directed by responding to them through Sea God or by going through Danitz. I'll head to the Seaweed Bar later. I'll get a fake identity, buy a scalped ticket, and head for Desi Bay's Conant City. That's not only the biggest harbor around here, but it's also Davy Raymond's hometown. I previously agreed to this Red Glove's request when I released him from creeping hunger that I would pay this beautiful Bay City a visit and tell his daughter that revenge has been exacted. Yes, I'll also think of a way to return the Nightmare's Beyonder characteristic to the church. Haha, how hypocritical can people be? I'm planning on returning a nightmare characteristic while also planning how to steal a sealed artifact from behind St. Samuel Cathedral's Cheney's Gate. Shaking his head, Klein closed his eyes and slept to recover his spirituality. After an unknown period of time, he suddenly felt something as he opened his eyes naturally. He quickly activated his spirit vision. Then he saw Rionette Tinker walk out of the void. This messenger was wearing the same complicated black dress, with a letter clasped in one of the head's teeth. Who mailed it? Danitz, Vice Admiral Iceberg, Frank, or Anderson? Klein received the letter as he nodded in appreciation. Thank you. He was very courteous with his powerful messenger with a mysterious background. He didn't wish to be strangled to death one day. Do you want to immediately reply? Rionette Tinker's four heads spoke one after another. Klein tore open the envelope, took out the letter and opened it to read it. The content alarmed him as he nearly forgot to reply to her. As for Rionette Tinker, she wasn't quick-tempered. She silently waited by the side. One day, Frank Lee will destroy the world. He definitely needs to be controlled. I can't give him a chance to advance. Seriously, how much does this fellow love to crossbreed and create all kinds of strange plants? The City of Silver is in need of food. A thought flashed through Klein's mind as he had a bold idea. It was to direct Frank's research efforts towards all kinds of food that suited the City of Silver. This way, cows, fish, mushrooms, rose bishops, the sea, and the world would be safe. Klein hurriedly looked up and said to his messenger, "Yes, I'll immediately reply." He instantly got up from the reclining chair, walked to the desk, got out a pen and paper, and started writing quickly. I have a question. If you eat the mushroom breed you create, then eat cooked fish and drink a cup of water, will it continue to reproduce? After finishing the reminder, Klein proceeded to the main point. Is it possible for you to create wheat that can grow without sunlight, or cows that can produce milk and meat simply by consuming monsters? That seems rather interesting. He continued on this topic and wrote a few paragraphs before folding the letter. He then handed it to Rionette Tinker and, in a natural way, he said, "The postage will be paid by Frank. Let's hope he isn't dead. After the messenger's four heads said those words one after another, a representative was made to bite on the envelope. Let's hope he isn't dead? Klein jumped in fright. Just as he was about to clarify the matter, Rionette Tynker had already entered the spirit world and disappeared. After contemplating for 2 seconds, Klein wrote a divination statement and used his topaz pendant to confirm that Frank Lee was still alive. He silently heaved a sigh of relief, packed up the dried mushrooms, and rubbed his temples before lying back into the reclining chair. After dinner, at the seaweed bar, Klein wore an ordinary-looking face and came here once again. Unlike before, the customers in the bar were mainly mixed blood or natives who had darker skin and curly black hair. They were either part of the gangs in Byam, or they were secretly working for the resistance, or even both. There weren't many ordinary people, and the commonly seen pirates who often came from different countries were all gone. Only a few people dressed as adventurers were drinking liquor and discussing rumors at sea. Klein swept the bar and found Daniel, who Danitz had mentioned. This thin local could provide him with fake identification documents and scalped ship tickets. Without any apprehension, he went over. A second-class ticket to Conant for tomorrow, and an identification document. Daniel looked up and glanced at him. After some thought, he said, "A total of £20. Just a second-class ticket to Conant costs around £9. However, scalped tickets are more expensive to begin with. Together with the faked identification documents, £20 isn't too ridiculous." Klein silently did the math before saying, "When can I get it?" "In 45 minutes, Daniel replied like clockwork. "You can pay £5 first, and then pay the rest after receiving the ticket and identification." "All right." Klein didn't harp on the issue as he took out his wallet and pulled out 5 £1 notes. He wasn't worried that anyone would target his wallet, for it might mean that he would save the £20, or even get more. Moments after Daniel checked the authenticity of the notes and was about to inform his subordinates to get working, he suddenly realized that the bar was extremely silent. Klein also sensed it as he subconsciously looked towards the door. There were 2 people there. One was wearing a formal tailcoat and a black trench coat, with brown hair neatly combed backwards. His eyes weren't big, but they were bright and piercing. He had a thin mustache around his mouth, making him exude a gentlemanly feeling while also looking a little sloppy. The other person wore a hooded robe which was rather rare. His face was hidden in the shadows, making it impossible to identify him. The sloppy gentleman scanned the area and was rather pleased with the crowd's reaction. A silver coin was tumbling in between his fingers as he walked towards Daniel. The hooded person followed behind him, taking out something from his clothes and stuffing it into his mouth, producing crunching sounds. The silver coin stopped moving when the sloppy gentleman came in front of Daniel. He said with a chuckle, "Prepare 10 tickets to Pritz Harbor tomorrow for me. They need to be split between 3 different ships." "Yes, Mr. Oder." Daniel stood up in a panic as he replied. Klein momentarily failed to recall who the sloppy gentleman who was tumbling the silver coin in his hand was. Only when he heard the name Oder did he find him familiar. As he was recalling, he saw the man in the hood take out a coffee-colored sweet before popping it into his mouth. He was munching on it, producing the sounds. After obtaining an affirmative reply, Oder and the man didn't stay any longer. They walked to the staircase in the quiet atmosphere, and they headed for the 2nd floor of the bar. Daniel exhaled as he turned his head to see Klein looking puzzled. He then said, "Oder. The adventurer, Oder, who serves the dawn. I remember, Silver Coin Viper Oder. He's always claimed that he works for Queen Mystic, but no one could prove it. I can ask Ma'am Hermit later. The last I heard of him was at Demir Harbor. He was apparently mixing with Admiral of Blood's intelligence officer, Old Quinn. However, the latter has already been finished off by Mr. Hanged Man." Klein instantly recalled many things as he deliberated and asked, "What about the other one?" "Who knows?" Daniel turned his head to instruct his subordinates as he got them to prepare some identification documents and the corresponding ship tickets. Chapter 722, An unpeaceful night. As Silver Coin Viper Oder wasn't a pirate, there were all kinds of rumors about him, most of which could hardly be verified. Klein retracted his gaze from the staircase and walked to the bar counter. He found a seat at the counter and tapped it. A cup of Zarhar. This was a locally produced malt beer. It was a lot cheaper than Southville beer that needed to be shipped over from the northern continent. 3 pence. The bartender recovered from his silent state as he picked up an overturned cup. The crowd in the bar began to break out into whispers as they were illuminated by the gas wall lamps. All of them were discussing the reason for Silver Coin Viper Odor's purchase of 10 tickets. He's definitely being pursued by someone. 10 tickets among 3 ships? It's clearly to prevent his pursuers from knowing which ship they boarded. A gang member with his sleeves rolled up, revealing his tattoo, shared his view based on his experience from evading capture twice. An adventurer drinking Lanty-proof scoffed. You don't understand Odor. If his plan was that simple, he wouldn't have the title Silver Coin Viper. I dare bet that he won't be on any of those liners from those 10 tickets. The only thing I can confirm is that they're heading to Pritz Harbor. Another adventurer shook his head when he heard that. Perhaps the news of him heading to Pritz Harbor is fake as well. The gang member from before was taken aback by what he heard. Refusing to be one-upped, he said, according to your descriptions, Odor has likely thought of what you figured out. That's precisely why he's heading to Pritz Harbor and will be on one of the 3 ships. The 2 adventurers were about to retort him, but they decided that there was quite a non-zero chance of that happening after some careful thought. Momentarily, none of them said a word. This made the gang member extremely happy as he downed the rest of his liquor. Klein was holding a cup of Zarhar as he sipped it while listening to the conversation. He was waiting for the fake identification and tickets he needed. There's another 45 minutes. I hope nothing happens. Don't make the bar into a mess. He silently prayed as he drew the crimson moon inwardly. The light yellow beer slowly dropped in volume while Klein would look at the wall clock from time to time, or at the entrance, hoping that time would pass faster. Half an hour later, the door to the bar was suddenly opened with a loud thud as the evening wind gushed in. No way. The corners of Klein's lips twitched as he held back his urge to smile wryly. He turned his body to look at the sound. Standing by the door were 5 people. Their leader had black hair and brown eyes, with recessed facial features and cut facial contours. He looked Loanese and looked to be in his early 40s. His expression was cold and he exuded a natural air of dominance. It made everyone in the bar quieten down without realizing it. And the 3 men and the woman behind him were in trench coats. They didn't hide the fact that they were holding revolvers, and that they would instantly aim and shoot if there was any slight sign of abnormalities. I don't know them. They aren't on any wanted list or have any bounties on them. Klein mumbled to himself as he maintained his state as a spectator. The 5 intruders suddenly scattered as they came before different customers, bent their backs slightly, and looked at them before asking, "Where is Silver Coin Viper Odor?" The customers were hesitant to give an answer when they saw the black muzzle pointed at them, along with the handle made of ivory and ebony which exuded a strange sense of beauty under the lights. They went to the 2nd floor. The customers who had been asked nearly pointed to the staircase in unison. Someone is really pursuing Odor. This is an act against Queen Mystic, or has Silver Coin Viper done something himself? Or could it be because of the mysterious hooded man beside him who was eating sweets? Klein drank another mouthful of beer as he saw the intruders send 4 people up to the 2nd floor. One was left behind to continue questioning the customers. Soon, the latter grasped the situation of Odor's request to purchase tickets from Daniel. Immediately, the person walked straight to the thin and dark-skinned black marketer, and he asked in a heavy voice, "Tell me honestly. Where is Odor heading with those tickets?" Daniel didn't put on a front just because of his social connections. He forced a smile and said, he didn't make it clear. He requested for 10 tickets that are to be distributed across 3 different ships. The departure date is set for tomorrow with the destination being Pritz Harbor. For real? The questioner was a seemingly radical man in his 20s. Daniel softly replied, "You can ask anyone here." All of them heard it. Dogs hit. The man shoved Daniel angrily as he turned to walk towards the other customers. Daniel staggered backward and was about to fall and hit his head onto the side of a tiny circular table when he suddenly felt an additional force on his shoulder. Instantly, he regained his balance. He subconsciously looked over and saw that it was the customer who had just requested to purchase a fake identity and scalped tickets. "Thank you, those bunch of military hyenas." Daniel first thanked him before softly saying through clenched teeth. The person who had helped him was Klein. He didn't wish for anything to happen to this ticket scalper. After all, he had paid a deposit of £5. Of course, helping the innocent was also a habit of his. Military hyenas? In Byam, this description often refers to people from MI9. What did Silver Coin Viper Odor do? Klein silently asked himself as he eliminated the possibility that someone was targeting Queen Mystic. To the lone military, it was meaningless. As he was thinking, the MI9 members who had headed up to the second floor rushed down. As they ran, they said to their partner, "He has long fled through the window." The group of people came and left in a rush. Soon, the bar resumed its usual din, but the still gently wobbling main door proved that it wasn't as calm earlier. Klein's wait for his fake identification documents and scalped ticket paid off. He didn't need to worry about any possible interruptions. After paying the remaining £15, he left the seaweed bar, and he returned to the ordinary inn he stayed at. "Junyod, this name is way too simple, isn't it? Before I return to Backlund, I need to make a more realistic identification document." Klein flipped through the series of identification documents before throwing them inside his suitcase. He took a bath and relaxed, prepared to leave Byam tomorrow and begin the last stage of his sea travels. At this moment, he heard knocking at the door. "Who is it?" Klein hurriedly took off his bathrobe, wore his clothes and pants, and walked to the door. Outside were a few policemen in black. One of them looked Loanese, while the rest were either mixed bloods or pure natives. "What's the matter?" Klein asked, puzzled. "Please show us some identification," a mixed blood said politely since the gentleman in front of him was apparently a Loanese. "Thankfully, I just made one. Otherwise, I'll be spending the night at the police station, or I'd have to flee on the spot, change my looks, and redo everything." Klein mumbled as he returned to his room and took out the identification documents. The lone police officer casually flipped through it as he said, "Mr. Yode, are you living alone?" "Yes, everyone in the inn can vouch for me," Klein replied frankly. The Loanese police officer revealed a smile and said, "Have you seen this person before?" As he spoke, a constable beside him unfolded a portrait. On it was an elder who was abnormally thin with white messy hair. Apart from that, nothing stood out. "No." Klein shook his head. "He likes to eat sweets," the Loanese police officer added. Sweets. Klein suddenly recalled the mysterious hooded man behind Silver Coin Viper Odor. He had been eating plenty of coffee-colored sweets in a short period of time. After a short deliberation, Klein said without hiding anything, "Perhaps. Back when I was in the seaweed bar, I saw a man who loved eating sweets and was following Silver Coin Viper Odor." The Loanese officer didn't hide his disappointment. After a simple word of thanks, he ended the questioning. Only after he knocked on the other guest rooms did Klein close the wooden door and return to the reclining chair. Odor's matter has not only attracted MI9, but it has also gotten the Governor General's office to send manpower to do a citywide search. "This is quite something," he muttered and decided to head above the gray fog to browse through the prayer points of light around the sea god scepter. He could gain more information from the prayers of the believers in Byam. He didn't wish to end up embroiled in a massive maelstrom for giving the wrong response. After entering the bathroom, he went above the gray fog where he summoned the white bone scepter from the junk pile. Swirling around it were countless points of light. As he browsed through each point of light, he determined that the questioning wasn't on a small scale. The target was Odor and the mysterious man, but he couldn't figure anything else out. After some thought, he cast his gaze on a point of light that had been specially marked out by godhood. It belonged to a mixed-blood policeman named Belaya. He claimed to have swallowed humiliation by changing his faith to the Lord of Storms for the sea god so as to climb up the police ranks. He was already a superintendent. Then, Klein cast the sea god's will into the corresponding point of light. Belaya, who was in the police station, assigning work to his subordinates, suddenly broke out into a cold sweat. He hurriedly found an excuse to enter the washroom as he silently prayed. Blessed of the sea and spirit world, the great Calvetua, your pious believer has something to report to you. The person we are specially searching for tonight is a very thin elder. His hair is completely white, but he has luxuriant hair. It's just very messy. He's very afraid of the cold, and he wears thick clothing even in Byam. He loves to eat sweets, as though he's a steam engine himself, and sweets are high-quality coal. The higher-ups have informed us to find him, but not harm him. Klein ignored Belaya and reined his thoughts back as he tapped the side of the long table. Compared to the portrait, such a description gives me a sense of familiarity. It's like I've heard of it somewhere in the past. To a seer, a sense of familiarity meant a clue. Hence, Klein wrote a divination statement and began questioning his spirituality. As he chanted the statement, he leaned back into the chair. He fell asleep with the aid of cogitation. In the gray and dark world, Klein found himself back in Backlund, back in 15 Minsk Street, which he previously rented. In front of him was the red-eyed Ian. This teenage boy looked up and said, "To Ronnie von Helmesen, the greatest scientist after Emperor Rosell, a mathematician, a mechanist, and the father of the second-generation difference engine." Suddenly, Klein woke up and knew who MI9 was looking for. They were finding the great scientist who caused many deaths between the lone military and the INTA spy organization solely because of a third-generation difference engine. They were finding the science freak who had mysteriously disappeared for years. It's no wonder Admiral of Blood's intelligence officer, Old Quinn, had a modified radio transceiver that surpassed those in Backlund. Klein was instantly enlightened. Chapter 723. Another good deed today. After a moment of his mind going adrift, Klein rubbed his temples and slowly composed himself. He discovered that the matter had little to do with him. He wasn't motivated to participate in the matter. He was apathetic to whether the lone military found Turani von Helmesen because he lacked a sense of belonging to the lone kingdom. What he had done in the past was solely to ensure a stable society and that its citizens wouldn't suffer any accidental damage. If possible, he didn't mind instigating a revolution to allow the poor to lead better lives. I never expected myself to become more of an internationalist after coming to this world. He gave a self-deprecating laugh as he prepared to return to the real world and have some sleep. Under the cloak of darkness, he would allow the tempest outside to freely unleash its might. At this moment, his attention was caught by the biggest item in the junk pile through the corner of his eyes, the radio transceiver. Speaking of which, what is the faction controlling Turani von Helmesen? It's nothing much if it's people from Queen Mystic Bernadette's side. She's a strong believer of, do as you wish, but do no harm, so she wouldn't do anything overboard. It wouldn't be good if it's the Rose school of thought represented by Admiral of Blood. Ignoring the Temperance faction that's being suppressed, as believers of the Chained God or Mother Tree of Desire, their level of vileness can't be lower than the Aurora Order. Letting them grasp the most advanced technology available might bring about a disaster. Klein stopped his actions of wrapping his body with his spirituality. He gently tapped the edge of the modeled table. He soon had an idea, which was to bring the radio transceiver back to the real world, adjust it to the correct frequency to see if he could receive the telegrams from Admiral of Blood's crew. Then, he could use the codebook he had to decipher the communications. There will be a huge sweep of the city tonight. The matter must be at a rather important and intricate point. If the ones controlling Helmesen are them, there's a possibility of the appearance of crucial telegram exchanges. In a situation in which the Governor General's office, the lone military, and the Church of Storms haven't placed importance or even accepted this technology, this is the safest method. Therefore, Admiral of Blood and Company have a non-zero chance that they wouldn't change the frequency and codes after Old Quinn's death. Anyway, I'll just give it a try. After some deliberation, Klein didn't delay as he returned to the real world and busily prepared a bestowment ritual. After bringing the radio transceiver into his room, he didn't immediately use it. Instead, he used a ritual dagger and created a wall of spirituality to seal the room. He was doing it to air out the gray fog's smell. To him, there was actually no need to go through so much trouble to confirm the faction that controlled Helmasuin. He could have used the gray fog's aura to contact Rhodes and receive the answer. But the problem was that he had posed his questions recently, and the smell that frequently appeared might incur the notice of evil gods like the true creator or the primordial demoness. It was extremely dangerous. Therefore, Klein decided to play safe by relying on himself. After about 8 minutes, when the airing was almost complete, he dispelled the wall of spirituality and controlled the radio transceiver to begin his surveillance. After an unknown period of time, the corresponding frequency received a transmission. Klein held back the joy in his heart as he seriously made notes. Then he flipped through the codebook which he had replicated using divination, and he began the necessary deciphering process. Soon he wrote a line on a note: 32 Black Pepper Avenue. 7 him. Tomorrow. Indeed, the people in control of Helmasuin are Admiral of Blood and Company. There might be powerhouses from the Rose School of Thought involved. Klein immediately made a judgment. This wasn't confirmed based on the content of the telegram, but a simple inference from the existence of the telegram itself. If Admiral of Blood and Company were uninvolved, it was unlikely for them to send and receive telegrams involving Byam streets. The meaning of this telegram is to gather by 32 Black Pepper Street tomorrow before 7 a.m.? Does it mean that Helmasuin and Silver Coin Viper Odor are hiding there, and they're reporting to Admiral of Blood of their location and giving a corresponding time? Klein thought for a moment and immediately returned above the gray fog. With the intel he had just received, he wrote the divination statement, to Ronnie von Helmasuin's present location. With the paper in hand, he leaned back into the chair and chanted the statement in a raving-like manner as he entered a dream with cogitation. In the gray, hazy world, he saw an underground hall with countless gas wall lamps. Inside the hall was a massive, complicated machine. It was constructed from copper cylinders, operating levers, take-up levers, and countless gears. It took up nearly 2/3 of the space. A thin elder with grizzled, disheveled hair wore a thick coat as he paced in front of the machine. From time to time, he would pop a sweet into his mouth and munch on it noisily. No, it shouldn't be called a difference engine. It's an adorable fellow who can analyze questions and calculate the answer based on a set of procedures. Yes, its name should be a calculator. The elder kept muttering to himself as Klein's vision was pulled upwards and out the underground hall, arriving at the building above. It was a 3-story villa with a garden and lawn. Outside was its address, and it reads, 32 Black Pepper Avenue. He really is here. Klein opened his eyes as he silently exhaled. Then he was stumped about what to do next. A scientist like him is useless to me. Instead, it's the root of many problems. I can't just keep him above the gray fog. Therefore, there's no need for me to personally get involved and take him away. Hand over the news to the lone military or the Church of Storms. This will effectively prevent the Rose School of Thought from obtaining any benefits, but there's a faction in the military that is likely related to the true culprit behind the Great Smog of Backlund. It's not a good thing to have Helmasuin fall into their hands. The Church of Storms is well known for being rash. A conflict might end up with the scientist meeting the deity he believes in. After some careful deliberation, he gradually had a bold idea. It was to make the news public. He would make the existence and location of Ronnie von Helmasuin known to the Lone Kingdom military and the churches. This could effectively ensure that the scientist's capabilities would be employed by the Lone Kingdom itself, and not any one faction. The key is balance. Klein smiled as he muttered. He then beckoned with his hand for the Sea God Scepter. For the former him, he had to carefully distribute flyers across the city to make a matter public and known to all, but now he had an even simpler and effective method. He selected a believer who happened to be praying, and then pulled his view back as the surrounding area spanning 5 kilometers entered his vision. Then, with the Sea God Scepter, he wielded control of the wind. Once the wind calmed down, Klein's will sank into the scene as he changed his voice, saying with a low roar, Halmasuin is at 32 Black Pepper Avenue. In Byam, the howl of the wind turned intense as it swept in every direction, bringing with it the deep and loud voice. Halmasuin is at 32 Black Pepper Avenue. Halmasuin is at 32 Black Pepper Avenue. This voice soon spread across Byam like a broadcast to the entire city. Silver Coin Viper Odor was donning a cloak, pretending to be Halmasuin. He hid himself in a crowded building in the slums, occasionally appearing to mislead MI9 and the Governor General's office's police officers. Suddenly, a gale swept past as the voice sounded in his ears. Halmasuin is at 32 Black Pepper Avenue. What? As the voice resounded, Odor fell into a dazed shock. Without noticing it, he fell from the top of the roof and nearly injured himself badly. Behind the Cathedral of Waves, and in a small nearby building of the Governor General's office, John Cotman and Robert Davis heard the voice in the wind. The first reaction they had was to look up at the sky before casting their eyes towards the borough where Black Pepper Avenue was. After the broadcast and being in a good mood, Klein threw the Sea God's scepter back into the junk pile and returned to the real world. He wasn't in a rush to bring the radio transceiver back above the gray fog. Instead, he left it there as he continued monitoring the transmissions. This way, even if there are powerhouses from the Rose School of Thought hidden in Byam, they wouldn't dare appear. Heh, and regardless who takes action, they'll have no choice but to hand it over to the country. Unfortunately, I don't have the habit of writing a diary like the Emperor. Otherwise, I could write something like, "I did another good deed today." Klein silently sighed, took off his coat, got into bed, and slept. He didn't care what was going to happen next, as it had nothing to do with him. After sleeping for an unknown period of time, he suddenly woke up and sat up. Then there was knocking on his door. Who could it be? To knock in the middle of the night? "I'm currently John Yode." Klein wore creeping hunger and took out Death Knell from under his pillow before coming to the door. The visitor's looks quickly surfaced in his mind. It was a thin elder with grizzled, disheveled hair. He was wearing a coat stuffed with cotton and a tweed overcoat. He was popping a coffee-colored sweet into his mouth. To Ronnie von Halmasuin. Holy fuck. Why is he here looking for me? I'm just the ordinary John Yode. Also, how did he escape the tracking of a demigod? Klein's first reaction was to tell the man that he had gotten the wrong person, but he held back and asked, "Who are you looking for?" Halmasuin smiled weakly and said, "I noticed you when we were in the seaweed bar. However, I didn't have a chance to talk to you. My life is at its end, so I recently recalled many things. Please allow me to introduce myself. You can call me Orange Light Hilarion." Orange Light Hilarion? Klein was taken aback before he asked in puzzlement, "Is there something?" Halmasuin chuckled. "I'm here to warn you. Be careful of the mother tree of desire." He paused for a moment before saying, "All right, I need to leave, and I'm about to die before returning to the spirit world. Do you have any enemies here?" "Why do you ask?" Klein asked, confused. Halmasuin coughed and said, "I can silently die at their doorstep. That way, you would have your revenge." You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.